So, chat, today we're going to talk about a subject that's kind of a sensitive topic, and it's something that admittedly I was a little bit hesitant to touch because I didn't want this to be one of those things that, seems like it's a situation where I should stay in my own lane or something like that. I wanted to make sure that I covered this topic with the utmost sensitivity. Because, anybody who doesn't know me, maybe there's people who, obviously this is going to get uploaded to YouTube later, and people might stumble upon this that aren't familiar with me. They have no idea who I am, what my history is, my identity, etc., etc. So I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a disclaimer at the start of this particular subject. For those of you guys who don't know me, I go by Tipster online. I'm a pansexual, non-binary individual. That's what I identify as in terms of, being part of the LGBTQ plus community and whatnot. And I want to put a disclaimer here that, this isn't me covering this topic and claiming to be like, some authority or representative of like the trans community, anybody who like, my say in this is like the ultimate, be all end all like opinion on this particular subject or anything like that. I just kind of think in regards to this particular individual, there are some valid criticisms to be had, and I want to be able to give those criticisms, but do so in a way that, basically touches it with the utmost level of like sensitivity. So my goal here with these criticisms isn't to encourage harassment of this person. My goal here isn't to engage in acts of targeted harassment myself with this or anything like that. I just want to give what I believe to be valid criticisms of this particular individual and do so in the most sensitive way possible. So that's what we're going to do with this particular topic. So moving into it, what exactly am I talking about here? We're going to be talking about a TikToker known as Lilly Tino. Some of you guys may be familiar with Lilly Tino. Some of you guys may not. Lilly Tino is someone who's somewhat of a controversial figure in the trans community. And for quite some time, it has been speculated that a lot of the content they do is intended to intentionally be like rage bait, especially from like transphobes and people on the right who are looking for any excuse to be critical of the trans community and justify the stripping of their rights. And so that's been a speculation for a long time. And they recently did an interview. We're going to take a look at that interview in a second here. They recently did an interview where they basically admitted that. They basically admitted that that's exactly what they're doing. They are making this content as a form of rage bait. And, when you're doing content like this at a time when right-wingers are literally looking for any excuse to demonize, trans people or other members of the LGBTQ plus community, when you're doing it at a time like that, like could be potentially very harmful. We're looking at conservatives looking for any excuse to strip rights away from, members of the LGBTQ plus community, especially trans people. And it seems like she is intentionally feeding into a lot of the, narratives that they try to use against trans people. And so a lot of people are genuinely concerned about some of the behavior that she's engaging in. Now, I can show you countless examples of what kind of content we're talking about here. But I only really want to show you guys one example. It's a more recent example that has sparked a lot of controversy. So let me go ahead and bring that up here. This is a video that Lilly Tino filmed at Disneyland. More specifically, it looks like California Adventure, judging by the background. And this is the video in question. This is what they had to say while they were at Disneyland. Here we go.
Disney's going to ban me for this one.
So, just from the jump, openly stating, I think Disney's going to ban me for this one. I think Disney's going to ban me for this one.
I think Disney's going to ban me for this one.
So you're in store for something pretty nuts, right? Tipster, you were such a good commentator. Oh, excuse me. Tipster, you were such a good commentator back and do decent React content, non-LGBT, not hating. It's just a snooze. I'm not sure what you mean by that. That are you saying that you prefer the non-LGBTQ related content? Are you saying that I'm not sure I understand. I'm really confused by that statement. But either way, welcome to the chat. You're welcome to give any feedback during my coverage of this topic. But anyway, let's continue looking at this content here.
Corn dog is still intact. I'm not happy about that, but sadly it takes a long time to turn a corn dog into a inverted corn dog. I do hair removal.
So, in case you didn't pick up on it already, they are using the corn dog as a metaphor to describe, gender reassignment surgery. That's what they're referring here. It's basically surgical forms of gender affirming care. Which obviously, if you're someone who's trans and you are opting to get the surgery, totally fine. Like, that's obviously something I'm supportive. I'm in support of, trans people doing whatever they need to feel comfortable in their own skin. And if you're going to get, surgery to complete your transition, then that's totally fine. 100% in favor of that. 100% in favor of that. But I think we can all understand when conservatives are constantly using rhetoric to imply that trans people are groomers and they're trying to like groom children and, stuff like that. Having a conversation like this while at Disneyland, a place that's very much targeting children, right? That this is clearly like not the time and place to have this kind of conversation. And it's definitely going to feed into the groomer rhetoric that a lot of people on the right try to use, right? Like, we can definitely like understand, what people are going to look at this and think when they look at this, right?
Removal every week for 2 hours.
And keep in mind, this isn't just me that's expressing these concerns. I've spoken to trans friends who are, they very much, have this criticism of Lilly, Tino as well. And they're like, yeah, I have genuine concerns about, right-wingers using this content to justify their groomer rhetoric about trans people. I'm reserving judgment. I haven't seen this video.
Straight. It is not fun or easy. But once that is finally done, hopefully by the end of the year, they are going to take my corn dog. These ears do not want to stay on. They are going to cut it down the middle. This is not the best knife for this. They will then take off the outer lining of the corn dog. Okay, I'm actually impressed that I'm doing this good of a job. Like so. Flip it inside out and make something of a tunnel. This tunnel will then become, well, my hands are disgusting. Now, you might be asking why I would do this or why anyone would do this. It sounds not fun. And I agree with you. I'm not looking forward to that recovery process. But know that this is not a decision that any of us take lightly. Our corn dogs do serve a purpose, but at the end of the day, I just don't like having it. It's not me. I look at it in the mirror and it's like, ugh, can we do something about that? And it turns out we can. But until then, I am making the most of my final days with my corn dog. Farewell to this thing that has served me not very well, but is what I was born with. It did its duty. R.I.P. I'm good.
Okay. So that's the video. And I think in any other setting, a trans person discussing, the topic of, getting gender reassignment surgery and whatnot, I don't think that's really an issue. I think that that's a perfectly fine way to kind of like simplify that discussion and engage in that conversation. Totally fine. But obviously there are some people who have concerns about like, okay, you want to have that conversation. That's cool. Why at Disneyland though? You know what I mean? Like it just clearly seems like, in my opinion, and the opinions of other people, that this is clearly meant to rage bait conservatives and get outrage clicks in a way that could potentially be harmful to the trans community. I have no, obviously no issues with Lilly Tino discussing trans issues. I think that that's fine. I just think that the way they go about doing it is meant to farm outrage clicks from conservatives and transphobes. And it seems like, based on the interview that we're about to watch, they openly admit that, yeah, that is their goal with this type of content. Now, we're going to watch an interview conducted by someone known as Myriah May K. I'll be completely honest. I'm not familiar with this person, but this interview was shared with me earlier today, and I thought it might be a good watch so we can give our thoughts. So that's what we're going to do. Gayfish says, I think she did it at Disneyland because she had corn dogs and saw a good backdrop. This video was fine. Okay, we'll see the interview. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's dive into the interview, and here we go. So we'll just kind of give our thoughts as we go along.
Everybody that doesn't know me, my name is Myriah. I'm a 39-year-old single parent. I've been transitioning for 3.5 years. As a member of the trans community and a dad to 3 children, including 2 daughters, I do not take this opportunity to speak with Lilly lightly. I do not know Lilly personally, and I've had very little interaction with Lilly prior to this. No questions are off limits, and I've not shared any question with Lilly, correct? Prior to us speaking now.
Correct.
Throughout the interview.
So I guess like a few days ago, this interview was done on like TikTok, and so they got asked a lot of tough questions related to their content. And I have already seen a clip where they address, the criticism of their content is like basically the accusation that they do it for like outrage clicks. And like as you'll see when we get to that point, I don't know where in the timeline that is. They basically openly admit that they are farming outrage clicks, which I do think that with that in mind, like, yeah, that could potentially be very harmful to the trans community. If you're basically looking at a lot of the criticism, the really dishonest and, harmful rhetoric that like conservatives use to try and invalidate the gender identity of trans people, invalidate the existence of trans people, justify taking their rights away and stuff like that. A lot of the content that Lilly Tino does seem to take those like comments made by conservatives and intentionally kind of, I wouldn't say pander because that's not the right word. It plays into them. It plays into a lot of the stereotypes that conservatives use for trans people in a very negative way. That's the criticism that a lot of people have for Lilly Tino.
I will attempt to remain non-biased and refrain from stating my own personal feelings or opinions on any of these matters. I will remain respectful, but I will be asking very straightforward and deeply personal questions as we go through this. Due to community guidelines, I will not be describing a lot of these situations in detail and may use code words in my questions. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you, Lilly, for letting me do this with you.
Thank you for interviewing me.
All right.
Quick, I think I already know, but just so we're on the record, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her. Okay. Just to get started, how old are you, Lilly?
I actually appreciate that because I wasn't super aware of their pronouns as well. Because on their YouTube bio, I checked their YouTube bio where this interview was originally posted. They said they identify as a trans woman. They didn't specify pronouns, but then also like I got a little confused at the start of this interview because they refer to themselves as like a dad. So I was like super confused. I was like, oh wait, I don't want to like be a dick and accidentally like misgender or something like that. So I'm actually really glad that Lilly Tino asked them that. So we know for sure the pronouns. So thank you. If you happen to be watching this by any chance, Lilly, I doubt it, but if you happen to be watching it, thank you for asking for that clarification because I was kind of like concerned about that as well.
And 32.
I'm not in the business of like misgendering people. If I ever do that, it's totally by accident. I'm not about that life.
32, okay. How was your childhood and what type of upbringing did you have as a child?
I had a relatively privileged childhood. I grew up in upper and middle class. Parents were together, still are together. One sibling. They're lovely, very kind. No, beyond normal family things, no real issues in the household. Lots of love. No, I had a pretty normal upbringing. I went to school. I went to college. My dad was in the Army for a lot of my upbringing. Some of it he wasn't. Some of it he was. Yeah.
Okay. What are you most proud of?
I'm proud of getting sober. I was lost for many years, very sad and not in tune with myself. And eventually I got sober, and that sobriety, among other things, helped me start my transition, which is also something I'm very proud of.
Getting sober is definitely something to be proud of. As somebody who's dealt with, my own sobriety, for anybody who doesn't know, I dealt with like a drinking problem, where basically I was dealing with some very deep, untreated like mental health issues. And instead of like, seeking out proper treatment, therapy, medication, or the forms of, mental health care that are appropriate for that, I was numbing my pain with alcohol. We're talking like insane levels of alcohol. I used to do like drinking streams on YouTube where people would pay me donations to get really fucking plastered. And even when I was off stream, I was regularly drinking alcohol just to get me, through the day. I'd go do my normal 9 to 5, sober at work. Obviously, I wasn't drinking at work.
Thanks for the sub, you
But I
fucking
was,
simp.
coming home from
Princess
work and
Rose Maria
instantly
became a
drinking.
subscriber.
Thank you for the sub. I do appreciate it. And I would essentially, like, for me, I would have like a bottle of Jack Daniels that would last me like 2 days. And then on the third day, I'd buy another one and start the cycle over again. I forget what the math was. Like, at one point, I did the math of how much I spent on liquor in the course of a year, and it was like an insane amount of money. Like, I was embarrassed to acknowledge that I spent that much money on liquor when I was dealing with it. But, I got sober. This year on the 4th of July will be 2 years sober. So I understand how good it feels to achieve sobriety like that. So good for you, Lilly, again, if you happen to be watching this. Same, I used to drink. I'm 10 years sober. Yo, congratulations. That's awesome. 10 years is a long time.
Okay, what is your longest relationship you've ever had?
That seems like a little bit of a personal question.
A couple years at the most, depending on how you count. There was someone who I was with kind of like a couple times, depending on how you count. But a couple years is about as close as I can get it.
Have you ever been in love?
Yes,
Do you love yourself?
I do. Sometimes I don't like myself, but I've been working on self-love a lot lately, and I think come a long way.
That sounds like something that like you wouldn't think would be hard to achieve, loving yourself, but it really is. Like, this might be being a little bit too vulnerable on stream, but if I'm being completely honest, I often have trouble with loving myself. I tend to be like really hard on myself. Like, there's things that I feel like I should have achieved in life by now that I haven't achieved, and there's things that like I feel like I've kind of like failed myself on personally. Like a good example of that is like my weight. Obviously, I'd like to lose the weight, and multiple times I've tried to lose the weight, and like, I'll make some progress. Like, I remember during COVID, I made a lot of progress losing weight. I lost like 45 pounds or something like that, and then I gained it all back and then some. So there's like aspects of my life where I feel like I failed myself, and as a result, it makes it very difficult for me to like or love myself. So, it's good to hear that, she loves herself, because believe it or not, that's something it can be really difficult sometimes, depending on, your life circumstances and how hard you are on yourself, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have a degree? Have you been to college?
I have a bachelor's in media and cultural studies from Macalester College.
Lady Zubet says dad's been sober for 46 years. That's awesome. Congratulations to your dad.
What type of jobs did you have prior to social media?
I worked at a summer camp for many years where I was an educator in a kitchen. I had like an instructional kitchen for 5 summers. I was very proud of that job. I learned a lot about myself and about others. And from there, I transitioned into the nonprofit world, mainly the Jewish nonprofit world, where I had, several jobs that were varying degrees of okay. And then eventually I got a job in tech, which is why I moved to San Francisco. And that was the last job I had before I started doing this.
Okay, were you ever fired?
Whenever I see other people in tech, I always wonder, like, because a lot of times people will just say tech, like, in general. And I always wonder, like, when they say tech, do they mean like they worked for like a tech company, or did they actually do tech work themselves? And if so, because there's so many different areas of tech work, like I work in tech, I do, end user support, technical support. There's like call centers, like help desk level support and stuff like that. There's people who do network stuff. There's people who do programming stuff. And, there's various different areas of technology. So kind of wonder what area of technology she specifically worked in.
Fired from a job?
It's just a curiosity. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it's not my business, but just kind of curious.
No. Well, I was laid off as a part of a round of layoffs. The last job I had was at a mobile gaming company, which no longer exists. And basically they made some decisions with the company that didn't go so well, and that's why the company doesn't exist anymore, and me being laid off was a part of that.
Damn.
You were never
being laid off from a job sucks. I got laid off from a job one time. I was working technical support for like a big real estate company, and this was during like the real estate bubble around like 2008. And yeah, or it was 2006, 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. Yeah, and I got laid off, and that shit sucked.
actually like fired from a job, so to say.
I've never been fired from a job. I've been in trouble for not doing the best job in the past, but I've never been fired.
Okay. How long have you been, or when did you start transitioning?
I realized I was trans I always forget the day. I think it's October 20th, 2020. And right then and there is when I started my transition.
I find that's a common story for like a lot of like relatively recently out like trans people, or even people who come out like in other forms of like queer identities. It seems like a lot of people really discovered themselves around the time of the pandemic. It's crazy, huh? I guess because we spent so much time locked up indoors at the time, we had a lot more time to think about things, and I guess that's a good opportunity to kind of engage in like a little bit of self-discovery. That's interesting, huh? Because like, yeah, there's a lot of people I know that right around the time of the lockdowns of the pandemic, that's when they came out. Interesting.
Okay. When and why did you start social media and creating content?
I've always been a creator. I have, from when I was little, I made like videos in the backyard with my cousins on like a handheld recorder camera thing. When I was in college, I made some like short or some like videos for my summer camp about cooking. And, like social media content, I started doing casually around the time that I started my transition. I went viral on LinkedIn, weirdly, of all places to start with.
Wait, how do you go viral on LinkedIn? I'm kind of curious about that, because LinkedIn, if you're not familiar with LinkedIn, LinkedIn is kind of like, it's sort of a social media site, but it's more of like an online professional networking platform and like resume type platform. It's basically like a platform intended to aid in like job search for people who are like skilled professionals. How do you go viral on like LinkedIn though? That's interesting.
And started building a following there, and then started building on TikTok as well. And by the time I got laid off from my tech job, I had a base of a following, and that's how I was able to start doing it for a living.
Interesting.
Okay, what is your definition of a woman?
That's a tough one, because a lot of people have a very specific and narrow definition. But at the end of the day, for me, if you feel like a woman, then you are.
The problem with LinkedIn is very much a social media site for people. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what its intention is. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think that that's the goal, that it's meant to be a site, for people who are job searching. I will say this: if you're an online content creator and you're also, on LinkedIn, maybe you don't have a LinkedIn. I remember on one occasion, somebody discovered my LinkedIn and they were trying to use that to dox my employer. So if I can give any advice to online content creators, if you happen to be an online content creator who's also got a day job, don't have a LinkedIn, because that's going to be a very easy way for people to potentially find out and dox your employer. So don't do that.
There is no rules of how your body needs to be configured. If you are a woman, you are a woman.
Okay. What do you hope people remember you for?
It's something I never really thought about. I don't know. Hopefully for making them feel hopeful, or for teaching them something, or for keeping them company.
Okay. How do you deal with constant criticism and negativity all of this has brought with it?
I have good people around me. I have supportive friends and family, and I have learned how to process the negativity and channel it into creative energy, but it does affect me quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a common thing that like all content creators deal with. I've even dealt with it like myself. Is when you have a following, there's going always going to be people who are going to be negative in regards to your following, whether they're engaging in acts of harassment, whether they're engaging in acts that they perceive to be criticism, some of which may be valid criticism, other instances not so much. Some people will disguise their dishonest, bad faith representations of you as criticism and stuff like that. So it's something that's not always easy to deal with. It does help to have like a support network, whether it's fellow content creators that you've befriended, whether it's people you have as friends behind the scenes or IRL family stuff like that. But yeah, that's one of those things that never really gets easy. It's always a constant struggle dealing with people who are going to target you, whether it's for valid criticism or it's just being shitty. That's a pretty frequent thing that all content creators have to deal with.
Understandable. Do you consider yourself an advocate for trans rights? If so, please explain how.
Yes, absolutely, I do. My platform, I use my platform to advocate and educate, not on behalf of the transgender community as a whole. That's not fair. I don't think anyone can really say that because it's a big community. But my goal is to bring the absolute basics, right? Like the most like core essential things about the trans experience and make them easily understandable and catchy and interesting for the average person who maybe has never met a trans person as far as they know.
That's actually an interesting answer, especially considering some of the criticism they get. Because again, like a lot of the criticism they get, and keep in mind, we're not just talking about like, people who aren't involved in like queer spaces or trans spaces. We're not talking about like, transphobes just looking for a reason to be critical of a trans individual or something like that. We're talking about like some people who are critical of Lilly Tino. They're members of like the trans community who they feel that they have genuine concerns about like some of the kind of content she does. I do think that a lot of their content, based on the few examples of their content I've seen, I do think they are very informative, and I do think that they do explain a lot of trans experiences in ways that are easily digestible and understandable. Like we watched the corn dog video earlier. It does describe getting like sex reassignment surgery in a way that is easily understandable for somebody who may not be trans themselves or completely understand the trans experience. Where people get concerned though is a lot of times they will often opt to do these types of discussions in places where these types of discussions may not be necessarily appropriate, or it's clearly done in a way like the angle is very much done in a way to spark outrage for clicks. And that's like the biggest concern a lot of people have. I don't think that Lilly Tino is necessarily like a bad person. I don't think Lilly Tino is doing anything that misrepresents the trans community. I just think that there are some valid concerns that some people have about the way that she outrage farms her content. And I think that people are genuinely concerned about like, hey, conservatives are using any reason to try and they're looking for any excuse to try and make us out to be degenerates and stuff like that. And when she's playing into a lot of those like stereotypes, those could potentially do harm to the trans community. That's the biggest criticism that a lot of people have for her. But, aside from that, I do think that she does a good job of explaining, some of the issues that trans people face every day in a way that's easily digestible and easy to understand. So credit where it's due. I do agree with that.
Yeah. Have you ever been charged or convicted of a crime?
Some of these questions are like super personal. Like, geez.
One time. I've never talked about this. I will talk around this because it's of keywords, but let's just say that about a decade ago, I had how do I say this? Gardening supplies with me, and yeah, nothing, no criminal charges related to anything other than that, though.
Okay. You've never.
Wait, was this like, okay, gardening supplies? Was she growing her own like weed plants? Is that what that was? Because she's very subtle with it, but like, was she running her own illegal like grow operation? Because if that's the case, that's kind of fucking based. I probably shouldn't admit that. We don't encourage illegal activity, Twitch, obviously, but kind of based if that's the case. I don't know if that's what she was referring to, but that's what I'm interpreting for that. Did anybody else in chat interpret anything else from that?
Ever had a restraining order put against you? Has anyone in your personal life ever accused you of stalking or harassment?
No.
Have you ever had a Reddit account with the name Pomegranate in it?
Yes.
Is that a controversy around them that they had this like Reddit account or something?
You spoke about.
Because I'll be honest, I don't know all the Lilly Tino lore. I know, like, I see some of the criticism around Lilly Tino, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't agree with. But I don't know the Reddit lore. The Reddit lore is new to me.
A little bit earlier about becoming clean, and you're clean now.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have or have you ever had anger management issues?
Nothing formally diagnosed. Nor do I think that's something I need to be evaluated for. But certainly there's a lot in the world to be angry about. And there's a lot of things in my past that I, wish had happened differently, right? It's tough to spend so many years kind of just like not doing anything, installing and not being yourself and kind of wasting away. And then one day realize like, oh, I could have been doing something differently the whole time. That's frustrating.
I can kind of relate to that myself because for those of you guys who don't know, like, it's only fairly recently that I've kind of come out with like my own LGBTQ identity. Obviously, like, what was it, like a year and a half ago, I came out as pansexual. Well, granted, like, it kind of came out, unintentionally. It wasn't my intention to come out when I did. I was going to wait a little bit longer. But, it did come out, and I did confirm it. Like, yeah, I'm pansexual. And then more recently, I came out as non-binary. And it's one of those things where, like, yeah, I was kind of in denial about who I was for many years, and I kind of repressed my feelings a lot. A lot of that came from basically like my upbringing. I was brought up in like a religious home, and so there was a lot of things that I felt growing up that I was kind of like, oh no, I'm not supposed to feel that. That's wrong. That's dirty and stuff like that. So I kind of repressed my feelings for like a really long time, and through meeting people who encouraged me to embrace these feelings and accept this part of myself, I was able to do exactly that. And so now I'm open with who I am now. But yeah, I kind of repressed those feelings for a while, and it makes you feel, it kind of sucks. Like, it feels like there's this whole part of your life that you could have been experiencing. Cause I like, for example, I'm 38 years old, that's, many, many years that I could have been, open with who I am and expressing myself as I am. And, I could have experienced like a lot of life experiences within that time that I repressed. And it's kind of, it's almost like a sort of a FOMO type feeling of like I feel like I missed out on so much experiences that I should have been having because I repressed these feelings for so long. So yeah, it could be really frustrating and at sometimes, kind of angering as well. It can make you really angry that like I deprived myself of this, part of my existence for so many years and now my life is kind of like blown by and I've missed out on so many experiences. It's a really frustrating feeling.
Okay. I saw something about a doctor incident when you were younger. Is this a real situation?
Yeah.
Was what I saw real?
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah, basically I had a Reddit account when I was younger. That was like, I guess the comments in question were around 2011, so I was about 18 years old. I was like just starting college. And basically what happened was I recounted a story from my past when I was 3, and there was another person who was 3. We were 3 years old, both of us. And we played doctor. And when I was 18, which was, again, 15 years later, I made a very off-color joke about that experience. I thought I was being like an edgelord at the time. Shocking humor was like what I thought was, cutting edge and cool and funny.
Was this something that you have memories of, or did you get like found doing this during this situation?
Yeah, I did. I have very vague memories. I was 3, so it's like pretty fuzzy. But basically, like we played doctor once, and the school that we went to saw or found out, or I really don't remember, and I was reprimanded, and that was it.
Gee, some of these questions are like really, really personal, aren't they? Like, goddamn.
And
I thought this interview was mostly going to stick to like, some of the criticisms of them and kind of get their perspective on it. But yeah, there's a lot of really personal questions in this interview. Jeez.
That's the only incident of that type of nature that happened as a child. Have you ever been essayed?
No.
Goddamn.
Have you ever knowingly taken money or received donations from a minor?
No. I will say...
Is that based off of, like, an allegation that's been made against Lilly Tino? Because, again, like, that's lore that I'm not familiar with either.
That, like, on this app, it is pretty difficult.
They did say that no question is off limits. Actually, fair point. Mo Moon, fair point. That's actually a fair point. Yeah, I would have replied none of your business on a few of these questions. I mean, yeah, that would have been my response as well. But Mo Moon does make a good point that early on they stated that no questions were off limits. So I guess that's fair. It's fair game at that point then.
Right? Like knowingly is the key word, right? Someone could easily sub and be younger, right? But I would have no way of knowing that.
That's fair.
This is true. I have seen a Discord screenshot where you admit to a situation around posting discriminatory remarks. Do you discriminate towards anyone based off their race? Basically, are you the R word?
Oh. I have no idea what screenshot you're talking about.
It was a Discord screenshot, and it looked like something you had posted in a Discord.
Can you read it, or
do what?
Can you read it? Because I really don't know what you're referring to.
It was just basically a confession about making some remarks. I don't really want to say the word of what it was, but you're not discriminatory.
I don't know what it was about. On the same Reddit account, like the one that I was talking about, there was another comment where again I was like being, like, oh my gosh, like the edgelord kind of, the Elon humor kind of, when I was 18 and angry and sad. There was some like really racist thing online that I saw, and I was like, oh, isn't this, like I posted some comment that was like, wow, it's so funny. Well, come on guys, it's a joke. Which was like dumb and stupid, and even at the time, not reflective of how I felt. But yeah, I'm assuming that's what it's referring to. But I've never.
I'm pretty sure that's the situation that I was specifically referring to.
Yeah, there's no. I've never like knowingly.
I'll say that's one of like my biggest frustrations that I've seen. I haven't personally experienced it myself, but I've seen this sort of thing happen to like other people in sort of like progressive spaces online, where like a lot of people will like attack someone, for something they may have said in the past that's maybe not necessarily representative of how they are now as a person. Like, say they said something like overly like edgy and inappropriate like 10 years ago, but they've obviously since then grown and changed as a person. They have like a much better perspective on the world and, social issues, et cetera, et cetera. So they might have been like a really edgy or even like, somebody who was like far right in the past, but they've seen the errors in their ways and they've moved on. I don't think that somebody should be basically persecuted for something they said in their past when it's very clear that they're not that person anymore. It's one thing if it's like, hey, somebody parades around as like, hey, I'm a progressive and, these are like my core values and stuff like that. And you see a screenshot of a private conversation they had where they're spewing the N-word and stuff like that in private. Then at that point, it's like, okay, well, this screenshot is from like 2 weeks ago. What's going on here? Then at that point, then it's like, okay, clearly you're living a double life. You've got some explaining to do. But when it's a situation where it's like, hey, it's in the distant past, this is a thing they said that was like really inappropriate. Let's treat this as if they said it just 2-3 days ago. Like, I just think that's that level of like, purity testing. I don't think I don't think it's very productive. Okay. At the end of the day, as progressives, we're supposed to be pushing this idea of like rehabilitation and that people can grow and change and be better and do better. We're supposed to be open to that idea, but it seems very counterproductive to purity test people for statements they made, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Like, I look back at, my teenage years, and there's definitely things that I said and did when I was a teenager that, looking back now, like, that was insanely inappropriate. I obviously completely disavow that stuff. I thank heavens that I didn't have access to the internet back then, because some of the shit I said and did, I know that younger me would be stupid enough to post that online, and then there would be like, instances of on the internet, and if people wanted to be malicious and try and purity test me and question me for who I am based off of statements I made as like a teenager, like, there are people who would absolutely do that. But no, that's not reflective of who I am now. It's not reflective of what I believe now. I very much oppose those kind of things. But yeah, all that is just to say that, I think that level of purity testing is counterproductive. If you want to purity test someone because they're telling you publicly, I'm progressive and these are my values, and then privately they're living a completely different lifestyle, okay, that's valid. But if somebody's very clearly changed after many, many years, and you're going to judge them for something they said many, many years ago, I just don't see the value in that. It just seems very counterproductive to me. But anyway.
Discriminated against anyone.
Like, how are you going to convince people to, shift their view towards the left when your approach to that is to purity test them and say that they're not good enough because, heaven forbid them in their edgy teenage years say something really edgy and inappropriate, even though that was ages ago and they're a completely different person now. Like, you're not going to convince anybody to view things your way when that's your approach to, people who you could potentially, turn into an ally with, the right conversation. You know what I mean?
As like beyond something stupid like that 15 years ago when I was on like comment boards.
You talked a little bit about getting clean earlier and that kind of leading into your realization of being trans. I believe I've also heard that you found out you were trans during COVID and after being cheated on in a prior relationship. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. No, that's not true.
Never been cheated on.
Do you think without COVID you would have ever found out you were trans?
I think I would have. I don't know if it would have been exactly how, at the same time, because it's hard to like anticipate that. But I actually started my sober journey late 2019, like at the very end of the year. And I think that was probably the thing that informed it the most. But maybe having time being in lockdown to like reflect sped up the process. And also me getting a job in San Francisco was informed by COVID to a certain extent. And being in San Francisco, which is a more inclusive place than where I was before, which was Georgia, probably had an effect too.
Yeah, again, like I mentioned this earlier, I think that's really interesting that so many people came out during COVID. Like I have, for example, like quite a few trans friends that came out during COVID. So it seems like there is something to that. The fact that we were in lockdown and we had more time to contemplate on things and really think about things, that for, people who came out, that was like a good time for them to engage in a little bit of self-discovery.
Okay. Do you think being trans is caused by your experiences and or environment, or do you feel you are just inherently trans?
The latter. Transness is not a product of anything that you experience. It just is.
Did you ever feel out of place in your body prior to that realization of whenever that moment occurred? Did you ever have any experiences where you felt uncomfortable in your body?
I never felt comfortable ever before I transitioned, physically and emotionally. I didn't have the vocabulary to express that gender dysphoria that I was feeling. But looking back, yeah.
Okay. We're going to start getting into some more like specific things here.
Prince Rosemary in the chat says, I'm not trans, but definitely the pandemic changed a lot for me. As a kid, I was a goth, but then I stopped because I got bullied, but then COVID happened and I became a goth again. So you kind of like embraced yourself. Yeah, I think, not just for trans people or like, other queer people. I think that the pandemic was a perfect opportunity for a lot of people to discover a lot about themselves. Like there were things I discovered about myself during the pandemic that I didn't realize about myself. Like one of the things, obviously, that I discovered is that I had an addictive personality. This is something that I didn't realize at the time. I always thought that like I had learned from the, because for those of you guys who don't know, my dad struggled with alcoholism his whole life. And he struggled with other addictions as well. As he would try to quit alcohol, he would become addicted to other things. And like he would just trade one addiction for another. So he had a very addictive personality. And I just discovered that I had my own struggles with like addictive. I don't know if it was necessarily addictive personality, but I discovered that I had my own vices as well. Where I thought I had learned from my dad's mistakes and I could do better. No, I was very much susceptible to that as well. And there's a couple other things that I learned about myself during that time as well. But yeah, the pandemic, because of the lockdowns, there was definitely a lot of opportunity for people to engage in acts of self-discovery. That was also a time when I became more politically informed and more interested in exploring my own political views. Like I've always been a fairly progressive person, but it wasn't something where I was that involved or that interested in discussing politics and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, before I started talking about it publicly, I was definitely watching a lot more political content, keeping up with political coverage, and kind of like informing my opinions, like kind of filling in the gaps a little bit more of some of the opinions I had. So yeah, that was one of the other areas of self-discovery that took place for me during that time.
Do you have any regrets about any of your content?
This is where we start getting into the content stuff.
I'm just thinking. Not really. I mean, there are certain things that if I could go back, I would do differently. But I don't think that necessarily means, oh, I wish I hadn't, like ideologically hadn't said something.
Many have said that you intentionally seek to be misgendered for views, content, and free meals. You've said yourself that you don't have passing privilege, so to speak, and you have a deeper toned voice like myself. How can you or we expect to not get misgendered?
I mean, that's the whole goal, right? That's one of the big things that I advocate for. Is not, no one is asked. I'm not asking anyone to read my mind.
One thing I want to point out is, and to be clear, I don't think that this was the intention of the interviewer, but I think it can be interpreted this way by some who are watching this interview. I don't think that someone should be like, discriminated against in any way just because they might not pass according to whatever society standard is for passing, or like the specific example that was given in this case was, oh, you've got a really deep voice. I don't think that matters. I mean, if you're a person who is a very respectful person and is not trying to be someone who's like blatantly like bigoted towards trans people or like transphobic or something like that, I think a very decent person would look at someone who presents the way that Lilly Tino does, and regardless of how their voice sounds, you would say, oh, this is clearly someone who identifies as a woman and wants to be treated as such and wants to be identified as such. Even if you're somebody who's not knowledgeable of like trans issues or like trans identity or what the trans experience is like, you could clearly look at somebody like Lilly Tino and the way they, present themselves, the way they dress, the way they behave, etc. And you could say, like, this is somebody who identifies as a woman, so I'm going to treat them as such. I don't think that, suddenly because you speak to them and you hear that they have a deep voice, that suddenly like that changes anything. They still very clearly identify as a woman. They still present themselves as a woman. And as such, they expect to be addressed and treated as a woman. And I think that that's the appropriate way to handle that. I don't think that somebody's tone of voice should change that at all. You know what I mean? I have plenty of like trans friends that like, if you look at pictures of them, they absolutely look like a woman and they 100% pass. And then you hear their voice and, they might not pass in the sense of their voice, but even so, it's still very clear that they identify as a woman and they present as a woman. So as, appropriately so, they should be treated as such. But yeah,
it's not on my slate of things to advocate for. I know that I don't pass. I know that I have a lower voice. I choose not to voice train. But
and to be clear, I don't think that like a trans person needs to voice train to be accepted as whatever gender they identify as. We've talked about this before when it comes to like gender transition, and I've discussed like gender dysphoria and how some trans people have different levels of like comfort in terms of like gender affirming care that's required for them to, basically assist with their gender dysphoria, treat their gender dysphoria. And it's different levels for like each level of trans person, right? Like some people, social transition is enough. If you're not familiar with what that term means, social transition is things like, going by, let's say if you're going male to female. So you'll go with a more feminine name, be identified as a more feminine name, use feminine pronouns, she, her pronouns. You might dress in a feminine way, etc., etc. But like for whatever reason, you decide I don't need hormones. Social transition is enough. I don't need surgery. Social transition is enough. And if that's enough for you to achieve your level of comfort, with your gender dysphoria, then that's fine. You're still a trans person and your identity is still valid. If you're someone that needs more, maybe you need to progress to hormones, then okay, do whatever you need to do to assist with your level of comfort in terms of your own gender identity, and you're still valid. Someone who, doesn't pass is just as valid as someone who does. Okay, does that make sense? I think that makes sense. For me, as a non-binary person, social transition is enough. Dressing like a dude some days and dressing like a girl other days is good enough for me. Yeah, like, I'll give you a personal example with myself, obviously. I'm a non-binary person. I'm still perfectly comfortable physically presenting as male. Like, when you look at me, I've got, a mustache, facial hair. I very much dress like a man. I very much look like a man. For me, it's more of the emotional side of things. Most men, whether it's due to toxic masculinity or just like what society deems appropriate for men, men are supposed to fit into certain gender roles, and men are supposed to, express their feelings in certain ways. And there's certain things that, like, expressing too much emotion isn't like a normal thing, considered a normal thing for men. I'm very open with my emotion, and I'm very open with my feelings, and I express my connection to people differently than most men do. And for me, my non-binary identity is in relation to my emotional side, the way I feel, the way I engage with other people, etc., etc. These are not ways that most men normally engage with other men, or even other women for that matter. So that's kind of where my non-binary identity lies. It's more on the emotional side of things, if that makes sense. But that's my point, is like, gender identity, whether it's like male to female, female to male, or you're somewhere in the middle, like non-binary or something like that, it's all different. Everybody has a different experience, right? So, but I don't think somebody should be discriminated against just because they don't pass, whether it's physically they don't pass, or like their voice, they don't pass because of their voice, or, whatever the case may be. Your gender identity is valid regardless of whether you pass. That's all I'm trying to get at. So I hope that makes sense.
When those videos of me getting misgendered go around, I know that I'm the one that puts them out. But it's difficult when I put those out to convey a greater context around it. That, like, I stream 4 times a week, if not more sometimes. In the past, I've done as much as 5 or 6 or 7 times a week. And I go to restaurants and I eat the food, hang out, and chat. And the vast majority of those times, I do not get misgendered, right? Sometimes I do. And when I do, I put those videos on the internet to draw attention to what happened, which is, hey, everyone should work on using more gender-neutral language. That is one of the big asks of my content, and the things I'm trying to educate about is we all should be using more gender-neutral language.
I will say this, that context kind of changes my perspective on one of the things that they've been criticized for. And I want to say my position on this particular criticism has been a bit... I wasn't quite sure where I fit on it. Because essentially what the criticism is, for those of you guys who don't know, there's these videos that Lilly Tino will often post where they're getting misgendered. As they mentioned, they do live stream pretty regularly. And so they'll get misgendered when they're at like restaurants or other public places and stuff like that. And in some cases, the misgendering is clearly transphobes being transphobes, which obviously, hey, I have no problem with Lilly Tino calling out transphobes for being shitty people. Go for it. We've called out people for being transphobic on this channel, so I clearly have no issue with that. But some of the instances where Lilly Tino will post these pieces of content is where people have accidentally misgendered them, and they're very apologetic about it. They express that, they didn't mean to do it. They're sorry. And it almost comes off as like shaming the person for like making a mistake. Right. And so there's been a lot of people who've been very critical of them for that. Well, like, did you really need to like shame that person? They're very clearly apologetic for what happened. They didn't mean to do it. And they're very clearly sorry. Like, was it necessary to like shame that person? And while I still don't necessarily agree with that approach to bringing awareness to the issue of misgendering, I will say the context that they give here of like, hey, it would be better for people to start, making a habit of using gender neutral language. With that context, it actually kind of changes my perspective on that a little bit. Like, maybe it's not as malicious as some people are interpreting it as on the surface. Now, I still think there's a better way to communicate that kind of conversation. But yeah, it does kind of change my perspective on that a little bit, that maybe the intention isn't necessarily to be malicious. Maybe the intention is to kind of encourage a dialogue on, hey, maybe using gender neutral language for people you're not familiar with. Maybe that would be a better way to approach these kind of interactions. So yeah, that changes my perspective a little bit, actually, because that's a big criticism people have of them. Is that like, yeah, call out transphobes when they misgender you when they're doing so maliciously, but when somebody does it by mistake and they're clearly not intending to be malicious, like maybe you don't need to shame them like that. But yeah, as I mentioned, this changes that perspective a little bit.
So how can we expect not to get misgendered? The hope is that if we advocate enough, no one will have to worry about that, right? If we advocate enough, people like, and I don't know where you fall on this. I think that if I voice trained and maybe changed my body language a little bit and, did a couple other things, that I could be in the realm of passing, probably, maybe. But there are some trans people out there who will never pass, be it for financial reasons or because maybe they're too old to pass, because, it takes a lot, estrogen takes time. Like if you start transitioning at 60, you're probably not going to be able to get there. And those people shouldn't have to worry about getting misgendered, right? Like they shouldn't have to say, well, I guess I'm just going to get misgendered 24/7. What if they weren't? That's the
so, sometimes it appears, do you ever feel like you could respond differently? Sometimes it appears if like a scene's being made, and if it means so much to you to not be misgender, like personally, how come you don't want to put more into like voice training and things like that?
Yeah, personally, I don't like and I don't think that the person who's doing the interview, Myra, I believe their name was Myra, something like that. My apologies if you happen to be watching this. I don't think it's their intention to be malicious or like insinuate something malicious, but I don't like the framing of that question because it seems to, intentionally or not, it seems to imply that you need to voice train to pass, and therefore like that would, you know, that's a requirement for not getting like misgendered, or implying that that's necessary to reduce yourself getting misgendered. I don't like the framing of that because I don't think that's necessary. I mean, if you want to voice train and you want to, change the way your voice sounds, or you want to get like what do they call it, like voice surgery, so you can like voice feminizing surgery. If you want to pursue those things, then that's fine. Like you do you, but I don't think it's necessary to voice train or to change the sound of your voice just so people won't like misgender you. Like obviously there's going to be like genuinely bigoted people who are going to be pieces of shits, and whether you voice train or not, if they know you're trans, they're going to misgender you anyway. But even so, I don't think it should be viewed as necessary to voice train in order to, I guess you could say, appease people around you so you won't be misgendered. Yeah, I don't like the framing of that question.
Let me take the first half of that first, right? Like that I'm making a scene. I know you're not the only person who has suggested that I'm overreacting or that my reaction is uncalled for. The reason I react like that is because, and I know this sounds silly, it's because that's who I am. I am a confrontational person. I complain about things, not just about getting misgendered. I love complaining. But also,
I mean, at least they're honest about it. At least they're honest about it.
When I see an injustice, I will stand up to it all the time, every time. So when I get misgendered, that's just my natural reaction. Like, could I react differently?
I guess this poses a question that I have for the chat. Because I genuinely want to know what the chat thinks about this. If you happen to be trans in the chat, or even if you're not trans, I genuinely want to know your feedback on this particular question. So the obvious answer, first and foremost, is that if somebody is misgendering you because they're being like, a bigoted sack of shit, like obviously you have every right to make a scene and call them out for that. Like at that point, fuck them. They're a piece of shit. But if somebody misgenders you by mistake, like it's not their intention to be shitty, it's not their intention to be transphobic, it just happens by mistake, whether it's just because they don't know you, they're not sure about your gender, whatever the case may be, it's clearly not done intentionally. And when it's brought to their attention that they misgendered you, they're openly apologetic about it. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, offend you. It wasn't my intention to, be cruel to you or anything like that. Like, they're very clearly apologetic about it. Is it necessary to make a scene and like kind of blow up the situation to that level when it's a mistake? Or is that like totally appropriate? Like, if you're misgendered, doesn't matter if it's a mistake or if it's on purpose, is it necessary to take it to that level if it's a mistake? So Ladies You Bet in the chat says, I let it slide because they just didn't know. I think it's fair. Obviously, we don't have a lot of people chatting. This is a late night stream. But if anybody wants to chime in, I genuinely be interested in some of the feedback. Not appropriate for mistakes. Okay. See, that's kind of like my view on it as well. I'm totally in favor of making a spectacle of it if somebody's being a genuinely bigoted sack of shit. But I feel like if somebody makes a mistake and it's very obvious that they made a mistake and they're very apologetic about their mistake, I think it's valuable to be a little bit more understanding, and maybe at that point it's a good opportunity to educate people who may not be knowledgeable of trans issues, to educate them on these things, right? As opposed to, let's ridicule them and let's shame them and let's treat them, just like we would a bigot who's doing it intentionally. That's my personal view on it. But if anybody else in chat wants to chime in, I'm genuinely interested of your guys' opinions on that.
Sure, but I don't.
If it's on purpose, then make a show of it and get your bag. Fair enough. She is a social media influencer, so like, hey, part of being a social media influencer is getting that bag. So fuck it, why not?
No, because that's not who I am, right? As far as the second half of your question goes, why don't then if it means so much to me, if I get so upset about it, why do I not just voice stream? The answer there is because this is who I am. This is like, I like my voice. And I don't feel like I should be expected to change who I am just so that I don't have to deal with like a certain type of inconvenience, right?
Yeah, see, and I agree with that part. Like, I don't think that, a trans person has to be, passing in every aspect in order for their identity to be valid. I don't think that that's the case. I think ultimately, whether it's because you're transgender or even if you're a cisgender person, you should be able to express yourself and be true to yourself however you want, regardless of how you look, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how you dress, regardless of how you sound. Like, these are all things that, however you choose to identify, you're valid as long as you're being true to yourself. So I don't think that, a trans person, who's like in her case, male to female, I don't think that she should have to adjust her voice just to be accepted by people. If she's perfectly comfortable with the way her voice sounds, I think that that's valid. So yeah, I actually agree with her on this point. I don't think that she should have to, change her voice if she doesn't want to, just to fit this like mold that society has constructed of this is what a woman sounds like, and you will only be treated like a woman if you sound like this. I agree with her on this point. I don't think that that's necessary. Depends on who's doing the misgendering. If it's Matt Walsh, most everyone else is allowed to make mistakes. I mean, yeah, that's kind of like my point, right? Is the point I was making earlier. Is if somebody is intentionally trying to be a bigoted sack of shit to you, be transphobic to you as a trans person, then go off, queen. But I think if somebody makes a mistake, then it would be more valuable to be a little bit more understanding of that and use those opportunities where somebody makes a mistake and they're genuinely sorry about it, use it as an opportunity to educate them. And maybe like, hey, if you're ever approaching someone and you're not quite sure of what their gender identity might be, it's not obvious based on the way that they look, maybe consider using gender neutral language like they, them. Maybe that would be a little bit more helpful in that moment. If you treat a genuine mistake the same as a bigot, you risk creating more bigots and then both people involved lose more. It hurts the cause more than helps to blow up genuine mistakes that are shown to be remorseful. I half agree with that statement, and I'll tell you why. Also, Zubat, I'm willing to believe the chat delay you're experiencing is because of the weather you're in, because usually there's like zero latency, damn near close to zero latency with Twitch, so it's probably a you thing. But anyway, getting sidetracked. I half agree with what you're saying, X570 Belmont, and I'll tell you why I only half agree. I do agree that treating people who make mistakes the same way you would treat someone who's genuinely bigoted has a risk of sort of alienating people, but I don't agree with it having the risk of creating more bigots. Because the thing is, if having an experience like that turns you into a bigot, the bigotry was always in you. You may not have noticed it at first, or because maybe up to that point you never encountered like a trans person in public, you never really thought about it all that much. But if having a negative experience like that with a trans person turned you into a bigot, you were probably always a bigot at that point. What I will say though is that an experience like that for someone who makes a genuine mistake, it may discourage them from being open to educating themselves on these issues. And that is just as harmful, I think. So I think it's a lot more valuable to understand, when somebody's making a mistake and they're genuinely apologetic for it, and using that as an opportunity to educate them on trans issues as opposed to getting angry. Because you may alienate those people in the sense that they may not be as open to learning. Whereas if you had treated it a little bit differently, they might be more open to learning, and you might be able to use that as an opportunity to teach them something. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah.
In a perfect world, everyone you use...
Because I've definitely dealt with people who've come to my community. Like a good example of this, there's a really good debate that I did that's on the front page of my channel. It's something along the lines of, what's the title of that video again? Let me see if I can find it really quick. Just so you guys know. Because I highly recommend you guys check it out. I don't do many debates, but this is one of the few debates I've done, and I'm actually genuinely proud of it. The title of the video is, "A Poncho fan tries to debate me on trans rights. They conceded." Highly recommend checking that out. This was a situation where we had somebody who came into my chat with a very transphobic mindset. And I thought, rather than just ban this person and have them move on and, stay within their ways, I said, hey, you know what? You seem to have a lot to say. Why don't you call in and we can talk about it? And so we had a conversation about it, and I was able to get this person who came into my chat with a very bigoted mindset, a very transphobic mindset, and I was able to get them to concede on their previous views on trans issues, and it became like a positive learning experience for them. So I think that there are opportunities like that where you can get someone where you can have a conversation with them, and you might be able to sway their opinion, as opposed to if you instantly just assume, oh, this person's a shitty person, fuck them. I think that there's a lot of value in taking a different approach to it. Like I said before, if somebody is genuinely being bigoted and they're just clearly just out there to be a piece of shit, go off, call them out. But I do think there's a lot of value in sometimes approaching these types of situations, especially situations where it's very clearly a mistake. I think there's value in approaching it differently. Yo, what's up, Chasing Dopamine? How's it going? You can't hide from me tonight? Yo, we're just happy to see you here. Thanks for joining us.
Gender neutral language, and I could have a deeper voice and not have to worry about it, not have to worry about getting misgendered, right? And that's what I'm advocating for, is for both things to be true.
I actually want to have a conversation about this real quick, White, because while I think the majority of people in the trans community, they look at they, them as gender neutral language. And if you refer to somebody as they, them, because maybe it's the first time you met them and you're not sure of their pronouns or, something like that. I think in most cases, most trans people are perfectly fine with, oh, they use they, them, gender neutral language. That's cool, right? But I've seen some instances, very niche circumstances where a very small but vocal element of the trans community will still get upset with you if you use they, them. Now, I can understand getting upset with somebody if you use they, them, and they're like, oh, I appreciate you using gender neutral pronouns. Just a heads up, my pronouns are she, her, right? And you continue to use they, then after that. That could be interpreted as disrespectful at that point. I can see like some criticism there, but I see a lot of people like if you're referring to someone that you've never spoken to before, you have no knowledge of their history, and therefore you don't have any knowledge of their pronouns, and you use just they, them, just to be on the safe side, they still get upset about that. I genuinely want to know the chat's opinion on circumstances like that. Like, is that a valid circumstance to get upset about? If somebody's choosing to use gender neutral language in certain situations where they're not sure of the pronouns of a person that they just met or they're unfamiliar with, is it appropriate for someone to get mad at someone for that? Because I've had a few situations where people have gotten upset with me over that. And keep in mind, it wasn't the person I was referring to that got upset. It was like someone getting upset on behalf of that person. I personally don't think that that's something you should get upset about, but I just kind of want to know like what the chat thinks, if that's a circumstance where somebody should get upset. Lady Jubeth says no, what the fuck? Mo Moon says nope, not the least. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
That's actually a question I've been meaning to ask the chat for a while, because I've been genuinely curious about that. I don't think so. I prefer when people use gender neutral with me, especially when I'm not open, not an openly non-binary person. Gotcha. I think if someone is obviously an ally, you cut them a lot of slack. Well, I will say this. We've got a lot of chatters who are really making some comments that are really thought-provoking in the sense that it kind of forces me to look at like the nuance of things. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of cutting allies slack, because when you present it in that way, and maybe this wasn't your intention, to be clear, that probably wasn't your intention, but when you make a comment like, let's cut the ally some slack, I feel like that gives them a little bit more wiggle room than they should have, in the sense that like, if somebody's an ally, they should be somewhat familiar with trans issues. Obviously, there's going to be like little niche areas where like maybe they're not super knowledgeable of this aspect or that aspect, et cetera, et cetera. So like if they're still learning and you're aware that they're still learning and they like maybe say something that's not super appropriate or something, or it's not entirely accurate, then yeah, you just kind of like, hey, just letting you know that's not right. Let me fill you in and let you know this is how it actually is, or something like that. But when you make a comment like, they're an ally, cut them some slack, that could allow room for someone to maybe make some comments that are like insanely inappropriate. And it's like, oh, but they're an ally, so they like get a pass, sort of thing, right? I do believe, to be clear, that wasn't your intention with that, but like it could get it could become a slippery slope when you make comments like that. Does that make sense? As in correcting them, not getting mad at them. Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. That's why I clarified that I don't think it was your intention to kind of go down like a slippery slope with a comment like that. But I just want to clarify that like wording it like that, it could lead to some slippery slope type situations. Because it kind of comes off as like, let's let the ally get away with things we otherwise wouldn't let people get away with simply because they're an ally. And again, I know that wasn't your intention with that statement, but like, it's one of those things where got to be very careful with how you word things, because it could be misinterpreted by bad actors. Does that make sense? Like a very dishonest bad actor might look at that and say, oh, look at those like trans people. They're willing to let an ally, I don't know, use trans slurs just because they're an ally. And it's like, obviously that's not what you intend to mean when you say something like that. But somebody who's a bad actor, they'll take what you just said and they'll misinterpret it, maliciously misinterpret it to make it seem like, oh, okay, you're okay with allies saying slurs or something along those lines. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I know that's not what you mean, but a bad actor might look at that and they might like misrepresent it to be like, oh, that's what you meant when you said this.
Why do you think it was okay for you to make the assumption and speculate that Kurt Cobain was trans when he is unable to respond to the allegation? Did you not?
Wait, is that a thing? Is that a thing that happened? Seriously though, if someone doesn't know and uses gender neutral terms, what do you expect them to do? Getting mad at someone who didn't know just seems basement levels of stupid. Gotcha.
I think that was disrespectful for you to assume.
Did they do that? Did they speculate that Kurt Cobain may have been trans?
But yet be so adamant how other people should assume your gender.
Yeah, that was a thing. I didn't know about that. So we're learning about some Lilly Tino lore that I wasn't familiar with. Yeah, I think that speculating on the trans identity, I mean, first of all, like, it's one thing if you're joking amongst like a group of friends or something like that. Like, for example, I had a lot of friends for a long time that would like speculate that I would come out as trans or something like that. And these were friends. It was all like lighthearted fun, so there was no harm there. But I think that obviously in most circumstances, it's kind of inappropriate, not even kind of inappropriate, it's very inappropriate to transvestigate someone or to kind of predict that they may come out as trans or, you know, something along those lines. That's a pretty inappropriate thing to do. But I think it's especially inappropriate to speculate that someone who's dead and can't respond, that they may have been trans. I don't think that that's I don't think that, yeah, transvestigating a dead person, I don't think that's an appropriate thing to do.
I fully stand by that video.
What?
Kurt Cobain has been gone for 30 years. Kurt Cobain cannot hear us. No matter what we say about Kurt
You'll never beat the egg allegations, tipster, laughing my ass off. I had to. Fair enough.
Cobain. Kurt Cobain's gone. Been gone.
I mean, I did come out as non-binary. So you guys were sort of right, I guess.
But does that make it okay to speculate that they may or may not have been trans?
Yes.
See, I don't think so. I don't think you should. You know, it's one thing when it's lighthearted fun amongst like your friends and stuff like that. But I don't think it's appropriate outside of a friendship context where it's just friends having fun with each other and it's all like, you know, lighthearted fun. I don't think it's appropriate to be transvestigating anyone, including dead people.
I would never speculate about an alive person doing
to be fair, apparently non-binary is on the trans spectrum, something I didn't know, but keep hearing lately. Yeah, you know, I never really, I mean, obviously, it seems pretty obvious in hindsight, right? Because it's a gender identity, so you're transitioning to another gender, so it makes sense. But yeah, I was kind of on the same boat as you as well. I never really thought of like non-binary as like being trans, but yeah, I guess to some degree it kind of is. Yeah, I never really thought about it until more recently, until coming out myself. But yeah, I guess you're kind of right. Trans is a blanket term. Underneath that is non-binary. So Lady Zubat says, what are the egg allegations? In the trans community, egg is a term that's often used to describe people who are like closeted trans. Like the whole idea is that when you come out, you're cracking the egg, you're coming out of your shell. That sort of thing. So when Chasing Dopamine, who's a friend of mine, like I described before, jokingly says you're not beating the egg allegations, when somebody accuses you or says that you're an egg, it's in reference to you're a trans person who hasn't come out of their shell yet and publicly transitioned.
Trans. Because that can impact that person's life if they don't want to come out, they're not ready to come out, or if they're not trans in the first place.
That was a question I had actually for a couple of trans friends myself. If somebody feels like they're trans or like they feel like, how do I describe this? They feel trans, but for one reason or another, you know, they choose not to publicly express it or come out as trans. Does that still make them trans? And, you know, obviously in hindsight, the answer seems like yes. You know, it's still valid that they're trans. They're just not out publicly about it. And for whatever reason, they're choosing not to come out. But they're still valid as a trans person. But that was something, because you got to remember, even though like I am, you know, somebody who's very in support of trans issues and stuff like that, there's still a lot of areas where I'm learning. So every once in a while, like I'll reach out to some of my trans friends and I'll ask them, how do you feel about this, or what do you think about that, or et cetera, et cetera. And that was one question I had for several of my trans friends recently of like, hey, what if you're someone who feels trans? You experience a little bit of like gender dysphoria and stuff like that, but maybe it's a situation where, I don't know, let's say you're married or in a relationship and you fear that your partner won't stay with you if you come out as trans, or maybe you feel like it would have negative ramifications in the workplace if you come out as trans, or, insert a million different reasons why somebody might be trans but choose not to come out. That was the question I had is, are they still trans then at that point? Do you have to actually transition to be trans? And like I said, in hindsight, the answer seems pretty obvious. Yeah, you're still valid as a trans person. But I kind of had that question for a while, and I asked some people privately, like, what do you think about that? And they're like, yeah, those people are still trans. And they actually like informed me that there's actually a lot of people who have circumstances like that, where they never actually come out because of, one reason or another. Apparently, like a really common reason for that, there's a couple common reasons, and they're the examples I gave of like being alienated in the workplace, or fear that their partner may not accept them if they come out. Those are pretty common reasons for not coming out. But yeah, I had that question, and again, it seems pretty obvious in hindsight. But at the time, that was a question I had, and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It took me forever to admit I was non-binary, living in rural Midwest. And when I did, my husband looked at me and said, duh. Yes, some people may not feel safe coming out or expressing it publicly. Some people may even be beat, abandoned, or killed if they come out in an unsafe environment. Yeah, there's various different reasons why somebody might choose not to come out. That's definitely one of them. If you live in an unsafe area where, harm towards trans people it's a very common issue. So yeah, for sure.
It's the same reason that we look back on any historical figure. For example, Abraham Lincoln, who, when you look at the evidence, shared beds with men. I mean, there's a whole documentary you watch about it, but and I did a video about it. The details are escaping me, but we speculate that Abraham Lincoln might have been gay. Is the point? We will never for sure know.
I think the same. I mean, I shouldn't say I think. I know the same thing applies to like how transvestigating somebody is inappropriate. I also think that or again, I use the word think. It's just a habit to say think, but I know that it's also inappropriate to speculate on whether someone was gay or bi or whatever. I don't think that that's appropriate to speculate on those kind of things.
If Abraham Lincoln was
coming out as gay is enough to be kicked out in religious households as minors, and being trans is even bigger target on your back. Yeah, for sure.
Gay.
Like when we talked about it recently, the whole LGBTQ youth suicide hotline being shut down. That's one of the main reasons why, whether, it's a young trans person or a young gay person or a young bi person, etc. That's one of the main reasons they reach out to those hotlines, is because they're not accepted by their parents at home because of their queer identity, or they are abused at home by their parents or like a sibling or something like that because of their queer identity. Like, these are very common things, and that's why those hotlines are so important, because they help to not only help someone tackle the issue of suicide, but specifically help them tackle that issue as it pertains to their queer identity. Sure, a person who's suicidal and who is queer can contact a general purpose suicide hotline, and there's a good chance they might be helped by doing so. But it's extremely valuable for them to be able to contact a suicide hotline that is specifically trained to deal with issues that queer people deal with, especially young queer people. But yeah, here it's a battle I don't want with most people. Only my husband, close people, and this community knows, because it's the only place I feel safe sharing. I get enough BS being openly pansexual here. Michigan tries to look progressive, but most people here never have to be called out for being for their underlying racism. So they just think they're not racist. They just see the truth. Jeez. I nearly got kicked out because my mother found out I was bi. My family are extremely religious. I felt like I couldn't be myself around them. I cut them out 10 years ago. Yeah, my sister used to get a lot of shit because, like, where I repressed a lot of my feelings about, my queer identity, my sister was very open with the fact that she was bi. And she's obviously still bi. But, like, my mom's a very progressive person now. She's come a long ways over the years. But when we were younger, she used to be one of those people that would tell my sister, oh, it's just a phase. You're just going through a phase right now. Once you get older, you'll grow out of it. That sort of thing. But yeah, my mom is much more progressive. She's still a religious person. And I've come to find that there's actually a lot of people who are progressive but also religious. Those two things can coexist, whether you think so or not. But yeah, my mom has come a long ways. But she used to be one of those people that's just like, oh, it's just a phase. You'll grow out of it. That sort of thing. My family is super religious, and some of my aunts disagree with my choices, but they accept and love me regardless. But one of my aunts would actively campaign to have me banished from the family if she ever found out. That is fucked up. Being a bitch pan woman married to a man is great because no one fucking believes you. Yo, wait, you meant to say bi pan? I was like, what? Why do you call yourself a bitch pan woman? What the fuck does that mean? Oh my god, I was so confused there for a second. Bi pan. Okay, got it. You got fucked by the autocorrect. My phone fixed it. Fixed it. Yeah, sure. I mean, you are kind of a bitch, to be clear. A bad bitch, but a bitch nonetheless. Uh, no, that's a thing that a lot of people who are either bisexual or pansexual experience. Like, if you are bi or pan and you're in a cishet relationship, then they invalidate that shit. Oh, you're not really bisexual. You're not really pansexual because you married, somebody that's like the opposite gender of you, or you're in a relationship with somebody who's opposite gender of you. My sister gets that shit all the time. She gets like, oh, you're full of shit. You're not actually bi. You clearly not. You married a man. It's like, what do you think we're gonna do? Like, if we're a bisexual or pansexual person who prefers monogamous relationships, you think we're just gonna get, you marry one of each, or like how do you expect that to work? I don't understand. But anyway, actually, if I'm being completely honest, I'm a person who feels like I have a lot of love to give, and I like, that bond that you have on an emotional level with like people you're intimately involved with. So like, if I'm being completely honest, I would prefer to be in a more like a polyamorous relationship. And I know what like most people think, they're like, oh, you just want to have sex with lots of people. That's not the case for me. I actually am not, as much as we like to joke about Coomer shit in this community, I'm actually not someone who's all that interested in sex these days, especially in my older age. I prefer the emotional connection with people. So I would prefer a polyamorous relationship, but that's not what my wife is interested in. So out of respect for her, obviously I don't engage in that, or I don't pursue that. But realistically speaking, if it were up to me, I would prefer a polyamorous relationship, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's continue.
Just like we'll never know that Kurt Cobain was trans. But it doesn't hurt to speculate.
I don't think it's appropriate. Personally, I don't think it's appropriate to speculate on somebody's gender identity, regardless of if they're dead or not.
Hurting. Certainly not Abraham Lincoln. Certainly not Kurt Cobain.
Not out of respect for his family.
What do you mean out of respect?
To speculate about their family member potentially being trans or not.
Yeah.
You don't think that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's respectful to the person itself. Even though they're dead, it's still disrespectful to them. But also, as the interviewer points out, I don't think it's respectful to the family either. I agree with the interviewer on this one.
That's respect or disrespectful to the family?
Well, to suggest that an implication that a deceased family member of yours might have been a certain way. Specifically.
But if it could affect their image.
That's one of the things I was thinking recently, dopamine, with like the Gaming Otter thing. Because Gaming Otter is like trying to invalidate my queer identity. The funny thing about it is, if you watch my streams for even, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, you would very quickly see that I obviously am like a queer person. The comment I made, because the reason why this stream was delayed a little bit is I actually got a request to call in to another streamer stream to kind of like fill them in on something. And this comment came up. I mentioned that, like, if you watch my stream for like 20, 30 minutes, you would easily see that I obviously am a queer person. I'm very zesty on my streams, is the comment that I made. But, like, yeah, they've been doing, multiple kind of like mental gymnastics, in their head to try and like invalidate my queer identity. And that's one of the things they said is that, like, oh, they're married to a woman. The term they keep using, though, is they keep saying that I'm gay. And it's like, no, I never said I was gay. I've been very public with the fact that I'm pansexual. But, okay.
Subscriber.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate that. Thank you for the Prime sub. But yeah, they've been trying to like justify their invalidating of my queer identity. One of the reasons they use is that they're married to a woman. And it's just like, what do I need to do to prove to you that I'm pansexual? Not gay, pansexual. Obviously, the real answer is I don't need to do shit to prove it to them. But like in a hypothetical setting, what would I need to do to prove to you that I'm pansexual? Do I have to do a live stream of me sucking a dick? Do I have to like film myself jerking off to like gay porn? Like what do you want from me, bro? Like obviously, like I said, the real answer is I don't need to do shit to prove anything to them. But like, what do they expect? It's so bizarre.
Image of how people look at them per se.
Yeah, it could.
That could be damaging to somebody's image. And if it's your family, though.
Me here for the Tipster OnlyFans launch? Oh my god. Absolutely not. I feel like to do that kind of content, you have to be really comfortable with like your appearance, and I am definitely not that. I'm very insecure about my appearance. People want it to be proven because they're hoping that you're confused. I mean, I feel like it's part that, but I also feel like part of it is that they just want to see, like, my fat ass engage in, like, sex acts for their own gratification. If that makes sense. Especially in the case of Otter, I do think that they would very much enjoy, like if there were a sex tape that were to leak of me engaging in, like, gay sex acts or something like that, they would very much personally enjoy that, I believe. I could be totally wrong about that, but I just think based on some of the comments they've made that is very much something that they would enjoy.
You say damaging.
Obviously, I'm joking, but like, yeah. Anyway.
What about being trans is damaging?
It wouldn't even necessarily just like speculating about anything. So like personal, like even if it wasn't you speculating about them being trans.
It's not that being trans would be damaging. It's that it's disrespectful to make assumptions about someone's identity when they're not here to clarify it for themselves. And even in the case of people who are still living and are still here, it's disrespectful because it's just not appropriate to speculate on what someone is when only they can decide, or who someone is rather, when it's only appropriate for them to express who they are. You know what I mean?
But like,
I don't know if I worded that right. I think I worded that kind of funny, but I think you guys get the point.
What if I was speculating that Abraham Lincoln was a lefty and like use his left hand? Is that okay?
I don't know. I just feel like, and I don't want to say how I feel like. Okay, I'm trying to keep how I feel out of it.
You can say I don't mind. We can.
I want to keep my feelings out of it. Okay, let's continue to move on. Do you truly think that your content does more good than harm, or have you ever thought that your content or any specific piece of content might have caused more harm than good?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think all of their content has... How am I going to word this? Because again, I'm trying to cover this particular topic with the utmost level of sensitivity. I don't think all their content has... The phrasing I'll use is potential. I don't think all of their content has the potential to cause harm. I think that if I were to watch the majority of their content is most likely perfectly fine. And there's no issues with it whatsoever. But in those very niche circumstances where they engage in, territory where it seems to play into far-right stereotypes of trans people, stereotypes that the far right and conservatives try to use as a means to strip trans people of their rights and to try and impose labels onto trans people like groomer or stuff like that are harmful. I think in those instances there's a very high potential for that content to be harmful to the trans community, but I don't think all of their content is potentially harmful. Just those few niche examples of their content, if that makes sense.
Okay. Countless trans creators have spoken out against you and the way in which you choose to create your content. Is this not concerning to you?
Some of those trans creators like to misgender me.
I don't think that that's okay, obviously. I don't think that's appropriate.
I think a big narrative that has been really front and center lately, and I think it's hard to talk about this without bringing this up, is that there is a conspiracy theory amongst trans creators specifically that I am not actually trans.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's appropriate for, like, if there are other creators that are speculating on the legitimacy of, this is something we dealt with Gaming Otter, with myself, in regards to, me being pansexual and me being non-binary, them questioning the legitimacy of my queer identity. I don't think that that's appropriate, obviously. And the same applies to Lilly Tino. Despite any criticisms I might have of Lilly Tino, I don't think that it's appropriate for anybody to be speculating on the legitimacy of their trans identity. I think that's very inappropriate.
Well, I think it's important to get into in context of this question. So when I see a trans creator calling me Nick or calling me him, it stinks to see it, but like, how can I take that person seriously? Yeah,
that's inappropriate. People shouldn't be doing that. People shouldn't be dead naming and misgendering you just because they may disagree with some of your content. I do think, and in fairness, maybe as we'll watch, maybe that's not the direction they're going, but it seems to be going in that direction, that basically any trans person that's critical of Lilly Tino, that they are those types of people that are trying to invalidate their trans identity. I think it's a little bit dishonest to frame it in that way. I think that there's plenty of, people, many of which are trans and are not engaging in that kind of, invalidating of your identity, that are critical of Lilly Tino's actions. But yeah, I think it's very dishonest to frame it in that way, that basically any trans person who's critical of you is just out there to invalidate your trans identity. I don't think that that's appropriate, I think that's very dishonest. But yeah, again, to be clear, I don't agree with people who are questioning their trans identity either. I think that's fucked up.
Okay, but what about, I don't know, I just feel like there's like such a sheer...
Yeah, I did hear a lot of that. I heard a lot, especially on the For You page of TikTok. TikTok is like, people have talked for years about how toxic like YouTube is, especially in YouTube comments. And it's true. You can look at any creator's YouTube comment section, regardless of the type of content they create, and you're going to find a lot of toxicity, unless it's a creator that like heavily moderates their comment section. You're going to see a lot of toxicity in YouTube comments, but my Lord, the level of toxicity that exists on TikTok makes fucking like YouTube look like a safe space in comparison. Like, holy shit, there's so much toxicity on TikTok and so much bigotry that like sneaks under the radar over there. Like, it's wild to me how fucked up TikTok is as a platform.
Volume of people. Like recently, as we've gotten...
But yeah, again, to be clear, anybody that's like misgendering or dead naming Lilly Tino, I think that's fucked up, and I heavily disagree with that. But I also think that everybody that's been critical of Lilly Tino is somebody who's engaging in that behavior.
Closer into this, I've done a lot of like watching, and scrolling. Seems like there's such like a huge variety. It's not even just those ones that are like singling you out or only basing their platforms off of you. There's so many like...
Lady Zubet says not the knitting community, surprisingly, or the book community. Surprisingly, those two communities are super wholesome. It's funny you say that because I think one of the funniest dramas I ever seen. First of all, back when I was a drama creator, I didn't even know the community I'm about to mention existed. But one, I wasn't aware that this was a community that existed, and two, when I found out this was a community that existed, I was so puzzled by the fact that there was drama that exists in such a community. But I once had a story suggested to me when I was a drama creator about drama in the, drumroll please, the scented candle community. I was not aware that that was a thing that existed. And when I did find out about it, I'm like, why is there drama in a community about scented candles? It's fucking weird. There's so much drama in book talk community. It's insane these days. Jesus.
Like offshoot trans creators, little creators, like it seems like there's a fairly large amount of them that aren't specifically like a Lilly Tino T page or whatever, you know.
I mean, what you're asking is,
does that concern you? Does that give you any second thoughts about maybe the way you're approaching the way you deliver some of your content, so to speak?
I mean, look, as a content creator, I'm sure you can understand that the thing that makes us successful as content creators, and really the thing that makes someone built to be a content creator in the first place is having a point of view. I know who I am and what I believe. If someone wants to tell me I'm wrong, be them cis or trans, okay.
Okay, I want to comment on something unrelated to this conversation that's been bothering me during the whole course of this conversation. How do people who are primarily TikTok creators and TikTok streamers, how do they take any conversation they're having seriously when people are donating all these filters and stuff like that to the stream? Some of these filters that happen, it's hard to not laugh when they happen. How do you have a serious conversation with all this shit going on? What the fuck?
Certain things that I have done in my life that I've been wrong about.
Haywood says, I just like the way they treat fast food workers. I think that kind of plays into the conversation I was having with my chat earlier of if you want to call out somebody who's misgendering you or dead naming you because they're a bigoted person, then go off. Absolutely. I think that that's a totally fair and appropriate reason to call someone out for misgendering. But when it's somebody who makes a genuine mistake and they're openly apologetic for the mistake because they weren't trying to be malicious or harmful in any way and they're genuinely sorry for it, I don't think that they should be shamed for a mistake like that. I think that that's more appropriately a time that you can use to educate them as opposed to shame them for their mistake. That's kind of my stance on it.
But advocating for trans people is not one of them. And I also think it's important to note that it is really cool and trendy to make content about how awful I am.
They ignore it. They get used to it. They just tune it out. I just think that if you're going to have a very serious conversation, maybe TikTok isn't the best place to do it, considering that these is there a way to disable these filters so it doesn't interrupt a very serious conversation like this? Because I think that if there is a way to disable that, maybe that should be done so that it doesn't take away from the serious conversation.
People know,
because I've seen people try to conduct debates or whatever that are even more serious than this. They'll be talking about the topic of sexual assault or something like that, and they'll have these crazy filters that are going on. It's it's kind of hard to take the conversation seriously with that shit going on.
Gets views, right? There's a flight attendant who I've
I'm not a big TikTok person either. The only reason I use TikTok is to promote my stream.
Never seen in my entire life, who's making thousands of dollars saying that I was on their flight and that I got misgendered and that I made a big stink out of it. Didn't happen, right? It's important.
Yeah, obviously that's not okay either. Like if you're just making shit up about someone. You know, I've experienced that where people have just like completely fabricated shit about me out of thin air, and it's not fun. But yeah, that's not okay either. I don't agree with that either.
Important to note how
I think that there are valid criticisms to be had for Lilly Tino, but I think if you have to resort to like making shit up to try and, you know, criticize Lilly Tino, then I think that that's just dumb. Like, why are you doing that?
people can be swayed by their algorithms, right? When it gets down to it, my content, like,
I just watch TikTok or K-pop news. I don't watch TikTok at all. TikTok is just not my thing. I find myself when it comes to short form content like that, more often I'm watching that kind of content like on Instagram Reels. I find myself watching Instagram Reels more so than like YouTube Shorts or TikTok when it comes to that kind of content. But even then, I really don't watch that content that much. I usually fire up the Instagram Reels when I'm bored and there's nothing going on.
not the only person saying that Kurt Cobain was trans, right? I'm not the only person.
I don't even really like making short form content. That's why if you ever watch my short form content, like my YouTube shorts or my TikToks or my Instagram Reels, they're literally just, you know, clips from my streams. Because I short form content just isn't really my thing.
Saying that trans women should be able to use bathrooms. But the way I say it is different. I know who I am. I know what I believe in. I'm always open to feedback. But I do this because I have something to say. And if people don't like it, okay. And I think that it's easy to see video after video after video of people trash talking me and ignore the fact that I actually do have a lot of support. It's not everyone that hates me. A lot of people like me.
Yeah, they clearly do have a lot of support because they have a very big following and they get a lot of positive engagement on their posts, in addition to like the negative stuff as well. But I do think that some of their posts are designed in a way, and they do admit to it apparently in this interview. I do think a lot of their posts are intentionally meant to provoke outrage from, you know, the worst people in the world when it comes to these kinds of topics.
Otherwise, I wouldn't do this. Like, if every single person in my life told me that what I was doing was wrong, and I wasn't like, and I didn't get any nice messages saying that I really helped someone or to like keep going or, you know, you got this, girl, like I look up to you, I watch your streams every day. Like, it's not insignificant. It's not like I have a small little group of people and the whole world hates me. It's easy when you get stuck in that algorithm of negative videos about me to believe that it's everyone, but it's really not.
People liking you isn't a barometer for being in the right. I mean, yeah, I disagree. I agree rather with that statement, because there's a lot of people on social media that will look at like likes, and if they get a lot of likes on something more so than dislikes, then that means that they're right. Or because a lot of people agree with them, then that means that they're right. This is like a very common thing on social media where like just because you get more likes than someone else, or just because you get more positive engagement than someone else, then that instantly means you're right. So I do agree with what you're saying. At the same time, I do think that there's a lot of validation, personal validation, that comes from positive engagement on social media. Like, clearly, she does have a large following of people who do enjoy her content and who do agree with a lot of the things that she's saying. So, yeah, I don't agree with this notion that every person who consumes her content is necessarily somebody that's just there for outrage or to, you know, shit on her. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I kind of agree with what she's laying down here. Basically, what she's saying is that not everybody who watches her stuff just hates her. So yeah.
Okay, so
but you are right to some extent that there's a lot of people who will use people liking them to kind of like basically say that they're always right, and that's not the case. But yeah.
how do you justify creating such descriptive content regarding gender reassignment inside of a children's themed park?
Yeah, see, that's the one that gets the most criticism lately. I think that the video that they did, and this is just my personal opinion, and I'm trying to be as sensitive with my criticism as possible, because I'm not trying to encourage any harassment towards Lilly Tino. I'm obviously not trying to present an argument that favors people who are, trying to use this to be transphobic towards her or anything like that. I want to cover this as sensitively as possible. So I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to pander to transphobes. I'm not trying to engage in any kind of harassment or anything like that. But like when I look at the video, I think that there's a lot of really good informative information about sexual reassignment surgery in that video. I just don't think the place to record that video was appropriate. And I think to some extent Lilly Tino thinks that as well, because they start the video by stating, I think I'm going to get banned from Disney for this. So they clearly think that, like, yeah, maybe there's something inappropriate about the place that I'm doing this. And that's kind of how I feel as well. Because, like, the right is looking for any excuse to call trans people groomers or stuff like that. And I think it could potentially be very harmful for the trans community to have a conversation like that in a place where children are present. I don't think that that's an appropriate place for that. Any other location having that conversation, like, probably would have been fine. But I don't think Disneyland was the appropriate place to have that conversation. That's just my 2 cents. But if you disagree with me, feel free to chime in the chat. Feel free to chime in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Again, my intention here is not to be transphobic. I'm very supportive of the trans community. But like many people in the trans community, I do have concerns about, is this type of rage bait content, is this potentially doing harm to the trans community at a time where the right is looking for any excuse to strip trans people of their rights and pin trans people with this very harmful rhetoric?
Disney World's for everyone.
But it's themed towards children.
No. There's things for children. There's plenty of things for adults, too. I mean, plenty of rides, you need to be a certain height. Children can't ride a lot of rides at Disney World. They sell alcohol there. They have events that are just for adults.
So you don't see anything wrong with creating those pieces of content, regardless of, I guess, if you think it's geared towards children or not. You don't think there's anything wrong with that?
Well, Disney World is not just for kids. You could say...
I think that they do acknowledge that there's some level of potentially inappropriate nature to that conversation in that setting, just given alone by the opening of the video, where they're like, I'm probably going to get banned from Disney for this. I think just on that basis alone, you can determine that, yeah, they think that there is some level of inappropriateness in regards to the time and place for that conversation. But I don't know. I could be totally off base here. Feel free to chime in the chat with your thoughts. Because I do, in this situation, I want to address these concerns with the utmost level of sensitivity. I'm not trying to pander to transphobes. I'm not trying to unintentionally engage in, transphobic rhetoric or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not even trying to engage in any form of targeted harassment towards Lilly Tino in this situation. In fact, if I find out that because of my coverage, any members of my community engage in targeted harassment towards her because of any criticism I give, if I find out about it, you're instantly banned from my community, from everywhere. But I do want to know from the chat and from the commenters, am I out of line with this criticism? I have seen other people express this criticism, whether they're trans or not. And I do think that there's some level of validity to the criticism. But I genuinely want to know what other people think as well. I do want to hear feedback in regards to this. This is one of those streams or videos where I genuinely want to know feedback, because I don't want to unintentionally do anything that could be just as harmful to the trans community that I think that some of the behavior she's engaging in is. That is not my goal in this situation. But yeah, I don't think you could be out of line for having an objective opinion. Fair enough.
I filmed a video. How about this? I
just
filmed.
want to know if you think anything's wrong with that. Yes, you don't think anything's wrong with that.
No, of course not. Why would anything be wrong with it?
See, I don't think they actually believe what they're saying right there. Simply, again, I have to refer to the fact that they joke about being banned from Disney for having that conversation at Disneyland. So, or Disney World. Apparently it was Disney World. I do think that they have an inkling in their mind that, like, yeah, maybe this isn't the right place for this. Because otherwise, why else would they say that? Just the other day, I banned someone who came into stream making transphobic pronoun jokes after you warned him about anti-trans rhetoric. Why did they get banned from Disney World? They didn't get banned from Disney World. Sorry, I may not be explaining that very well. I know you showed up a little bit later, so you didn't see the clip that we played at the beginning. But they did a video where they discussed the topic of gender reassignment surgery. And they were using a corn dog as a prop to describe how male to female gender reassignment surgery works. And I think that, the video was very informative for anybody who's curious about, the process of gender reassignment surgery for male to female transition. I think that, it was an informative video, and, it was done in a way that helps people, in a very simplified way, understand that process. The criticism that they're getting is that they did that video at Disney World. This is a place that's a theme park that's occupied by children. There are children present. Transphobes are regularly trying to label trans people as groomers, and they're using any excuse they can to try and fit that label on trans people. And that the criticism is maybe Disney World, a place where kids are present, isn't the appropriate place to have that conversation because it can feed into anti-trans rhetoric in a very negative way. And the criticism I'm giving right now is Lilly, Tino, when asked, do you think that there's anything wrong with that content? They're saying no. And I don't think that they're being 100% truthful with their feelings on that, because at the start of the clip where they're, doing this demonstration with the corn dog, they openly state at the very start of the clip, I think I'm going to get banned from Disney for this. So that seems to suggest to me that on some level, they think that there's some level of inappropriateness to having that conversation at a theme park where children are present. That's what that seems to suggest to me. I could be wrong, and I'm open to, that conversation. But to me, that seems like, yeah, if you're going to make a comment like that at the start of the video, you probably understand that there is some level of inappropriateness to this conversation in this location.
No kids in the video. Kids weren't listening. Why does it
what does it accomplish doing it there, and why not make that sort of content in a more private setting, or setting that a lot of people perceive to be a children's themed park? Why not do it somewhere else, basically? Why there, of all places?
Because I love Disney World. And there's a lot of fun, interesting visual things that I can use to make content with.
Have you ever visited any Disney park prior to transitioning and becoming a content creator?
Yeah. I grew up in Florida. Busch Gardens, Disney, Universal, Islands of Adventure. Love it. Love it all. How many times I rode the Men in Black ride when I was in middle school, over and over and over again. It was like it was like a part-time job riding that ride.
So, going deeper into that, recently the Florida Attorney General has said that they are investigating the issue regarding your content in and around women's restrooms on your recent trip to Disney World. Do you not think this type of attention is harmful towards our community?
That I wasn't aware of. That's news to me. Holy shit. So, goddamn. I mean, granted, it's the Florida government. Florida has made a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of laws and stuff like that passed in Florida that are very anti-trans. So on one level, it doesn't surprise me. But no, I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that they were being investigated by parts of the Florida government. That's crazy.
It's a bit of a skewed way to ask that question, right? I guess the real...
Florida is Bizarro, California. How so? Florida is a very red state, and California is a very progressive state. Like, they're like complete opposites of each other. Florida is just a weird place in general, but like, yeah.
If you take the Florida Attorney General out of it, maybe we should talk about those pictures to begin.
I think it's valid. Everyone should be aware of not giving fascist ammunition, so not Disneyland. Okay, yeah, because I'll be honest. When I broached the topic of covering this with, I reached out to a couple trans friends and I reached out to some other friends as well. And I'm like, look, I want to talk about this because I think there is some valid criticism to be had of this creator. Not because they're trans, obviously, but just because of some of the nature of their content and some of the fact that it does seem like the intention of their content is to outrage farm. I think that there is some valid criticism to be had, but I was very concerned about the level of sensitivity in discussing this content because I don't know if like I'm stepping outside of my lane to discuss this sort of thing, or if like I would be sensitive enough to discuss it in an appropriate manner. These were things I genuinely were concerned about. So I do appreciate the feedback from the chat. And even if you happen to have feedback where you think that I'm out of line, please feel free to share it. I'm open to hearing these conversations, like especially when this goes live on YouTube. I will be closely watching the comment section for at least a few days to see some of the feedback that I get, because I am genuinely curious about, what people think about it. I'm sure a lot of people in this chat know that it's never my intention to harass anyone. It's never my intention to pander to people who are transphobic or like anything like that. Quite the opposite. But yeah, this was a topic that I didn't approach this topic lightly. This is something that I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to make sure I covered it in a sensitive manner. But yeah, that's why we're not doing a whole lot of the joking that we usually do when we cover topics on stream, and a lot of the, the memes and stuff like that. I'm taking this like very seriously because I want to make sure I cover this with the utmost level of sensitivity.
Again, right? Those pictures I took because it's important to normalize trans women in women's bathrooms. Wouldn't you agree?
So I'm not super familiar with their trans women in women's bathrooms coverage. I'm not super familiar with that. What did they do exactly? I'm hoping that like they clarify in this interview. Maybe who was the chatter that said they were familiar with some of this? Princess Rose Maria. Maybe they're more familiar with what was happening here. Can you clarify if you know? Because I don't know specifically their coverage of like trans women in women's bathrooms. Because obviously, like, I think that you should be able to use whatever bathroom you're most comfortable using in regards to, like, if you're a transgender individual. So, like, obviously, like, if you're a trans woman, you should be able to use the women's bathroom because it's the space you'd feel most comfortable in. But, like, what was the controversy surrounding them and trans women and in women's restrooms? I'm not familiar with that. Trevor says, hey, how are you? I'm doing good. How are you? Welcome, first time chatter.
Yes, but the argument is that I guess the place you decided to do this is really what all this revolves around. You're adamant that Disney World or Disneyland isn't a children's themed place, but most people, the majority of people that visit or the reason they go is for the younger age people. Of course, you have adults there and things like that, but the majority of who's attending these parks and what their trips are around going there.
Were they like filming in the bathroom, or were they like taking pictures in the bathroom? Because I don't know what the laws are like in Florida, but in most places it's illegal to film or take photographs in a public bathroom. So if that's the criticism, If that's what they were doing, I don't know, because I'm not familiar with this particular controversy. I've actually learned about a lot of controversies related to them that I wasn't aware of. The biggest thing I was aware of was obviously the Disneyland thing, and then also the fact that they rage bait their content with the intention of sparking outrage. But like, I don't know about the bathroom thing, but if that was the bathroom thing, if it was a case of them taking pictures or filming video in a public bathroom, like, yeah, that's a private space, so that would be inappropriate. You shouldn't be doing that, and in many jurisdictions, that's illegal. Lilly was taking photos of women in the, yeah, okay, so if that's the case, then yeah, that's highly inappropriate. They should not have been doing that. And in, like I said, in a lot of jurisdictions, that's illegal. Some of you guys may remember, quite a few years ago, before Dr. Disrespect got banned from Twitch, there was a controversy in relation to them streaming in a public bathroom, which again, in the jurisdiction they were in Southern California, that is illegal. It is illegal to photograph or film in the bathroom. So they ended up getting banned from Twitch, and I believe they were at a convention. I think they were at E3. I'm not sure what convention they were at, but they were at a convention, and they got banned from the convention. They were no longer allowed to attend the convention. So yeah, that is highly inappropriate. Taking pictures in a public bathroom. They were at TwitchCon. I'm pretty sure it was E3. I'll have to double check, but I'm almost positive it was E3. But yeah, taking pictures of someone, or filming video of someone in like a public bathroom, yeah, that's highly illegal.
Is children.
False. I mean,
so you don't think that that video and the bathroom selfies and including other people?
So I did get clarification for that. It was E3. Dr. Disrespect streams inside an E3 bathroom. So that did take place at E3.
Created negative attention towards our community?
Myriah, there is negative attention towards our community, whether or not.
I think if, like, let's say in a hypothetical setting, like if you wanted to educate on the issue of, like, you know, trans women in women's bathrooms and, you know, obviously speak in favor of that. If you were, say, not directly outside of a bathroom, because then, you know, depending on how close you are, you could still potentially unintentionally film people who are inside. But if you're like, say, you're standing, you know, somewhere and like in the distance, you can see the women's bathroom and you're discussing the issue of trans women in women's bathrooms and giving your opinion on it, I think that that's fine. You know, I think that that's a perfectly fine way to communicate your thoughts on that particular issue. But if you're doing so while taking photographs or filming video in the bathroom, that's highly inappropriate. Even if you happen to be in a jurisdiction where it's not illegal, that's a real invasion of privacy to be like taking photos and filming people who are in a bathroom. So yeah, if that's what she was doing, if what Princess Rosemarie in the chat is telling me that happened, then yeah, that's highly inappropriate. They should not have been doing that.
I am making content in Disney.
I can 100% understand the criticism of them if that's the case.
People are going to find anything they can to attack us with.
Yeah, but
we could literally
smarter ways to go about it rather than like doing all.
What kind of bullshit logic is that? There's already bad look at our community, so what's the problem with bringing more negativity our way? Wait, did she say that? I might have been talking so much. I apologize that I totally missed that point. But is that something they said? That like because there's already negative attention towards that community, why not bring more negative attention our way? Did they say that? Hey, Tip, it's Cheesebell. I changed my name on social media, but it's me. Oh, good to see you. Welcome back. Yeah, rewind it. How far back do I go? Because this is like a video. Oh, okay, so I could quick rewind. Maybe that's enough?
That that video and the bathroom selfies and including other people created negative attention towards our community?
Myriah, there is negative attention towards our community, whether or not I am making content in Disney. People are going to find anything they can to attack us with.
Yeah, but
we could literally
smarter ways to go about it rather than like doing.
I mean, okay. I do have to clarify that that's not exactly the way they positioned it. It wasn't a case of there's already negative attention towards our community, so like why not bring more? That's not exactly the way that they phrased it, so I have to kind of like stop you on that one. They are right that there is a lot of negative attention towards, the trans community by people who are misrepresenting that community in bad faith, or people that are like just they're bigots and they're transphobic, etc. This is a very true statement that she's making here, and they are going to look for any excuse to try and misrepresent this community. I actually don't disagree with her on that. She's totally right. I do think that her content sometimes, in very niche examples, does bring more negative attention to said community, and I think that that could potentially be harmful to said community. But I do disagree with that framing of it, that they were like, oh, well, we already get negative attention, so why not bring more negative? Yeah, I don't agree with that framing. Yeah.
All of this in like Disney World is the whole thing. Like, as a parent myself, I just can't wrap my head around how you could think that that location specifically would be the place of places to go make these videos about gender reassignment and take bunch of bathroom selfies with you. You have people in the back that didn't consent, and they've came out and said they felt uncomfortable.
Is this on her TikTok? Let me see, because I gotta see this for myself now, because I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm not gonna show it on stream in case there is something inappropriate happening. But let's see, Lilly Tino TikTok. I have to see this for myself. So they mentioned that this is also Disney related content. So let me go to. Oh yeah, they're literally. Oh no, this is not. Yeah, this is not appropriate. They're literally taking selfies in the bathroom in a way that like you can see the other people in the background in the bathroom. That's like a real invasion of privacy. That picture is fine. It's just like a typical mirror selfie.
When did you realize your son was a monster?
I hate TikTok so much.
Those Disney
You'll be looking at a piece of content on TikTok. Like in this case, it's a slideshow of images. And like I'm trying to like look at the images, and it just randomly skips to the next TikTok video. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm trying to like look at this. Could you not? Now where was I at? I totally lost my spot now because of this stupid shit. Where's that fucking video I was just looking at now? Fucking TikTok. I hate TikTok so much. TikTok is such a garbage platform. Oh, there we are. Okay, pause. Could you not skip to another video, please, this time? Thank you. So, like, the first opening image, I'm not going to show it on screen because it is inappropriate. Like, this is the kind of thing Dr. Disrespect got banned for before. She's taking a mirror selfie, and the way that the mirror is positioned is, like, behind her, you could see other people using the bathroom. That's highly inappropriate and an invasion of privacy. 100%. The second picture's fine. She's the only one in the picture. She's in a bathroom, but she's the only one in the picture. It doesn't look like anybody else is around. That's fine. Another one, it's just her. That's fine. So the fourth one, because it's a slideshow, I'm going through the slides. People in the background again. That's not okay. It's just her in that one. People in the background. Not okay. More people in the background. So there's a handful of basically there's a handful of pictures. They're all mirror selfies in public bathrooms at Disney World. And of those pictures, there's about a third of those pictures are taken with other people in the background using the bathroom. Those particular pictures, I don't think that that's appropriate. You shouldn't be doing that. You should not be invading people's privacy, regardless of legality. You should not be invading people's privacy while they're using the restroom. That's not okay. But yeah, I'm totally glad I didn't show that on stream because that's super, super, super inappropriate. Holy shit. So I think that criticism of her is 100% valid.
And then you've responded with like a video somewhat mocking this person. Like all of this you feel is okay to do?
I think you're
like you don't see any wrong, Lilly?
I think like in terms of the Disneyland video that we showed earlier, the whole like the corn dog thing, I think that there are some people who could probably make arguments, that it's not really that problematic. Like I think I had a chatter earlier who was making that argument that it really isn't that big of a deal. So I think that there's like nuanced conversations to be had about that. I don't think that there's any nuanced conversation to be had about taking pictures in the bathroom where other people are present and you're essentially invading their privacy. That's not okay. Like I don't think there's any argument you can make to justify that.
Huh?
Then why the fuck filming a bathroom and bringing even more attention and negativity towards you? Yeah, I don't think that that's appropriate. It's one thing if you're filming in the bathroom or like doing like a mirror selfie and it's just you. Okay, you just happen to be in the bathroom and it's an empty bathroom and you're the only person in there. Okay, fine, whatever. Lots of people do mirror selfies in public bathrooms in those types of circumstances. That's fine. But when you're invading the privacy of other people just trying to use the restroom, that's not okay. You shouldn't do that.
You don't
It's both morally wrong and in some cases, depending on jurisdiction, it's legally wrong.
see any wrong in any of this? Like,
Why? Why would I? You tell me.
okay, I'm not.
See, this person is a lot like myself where they're very clearly trying to cover this topic in a very sensitive way. It's really hard, right? Because you don't want to step on any toes and you don't want to cross any lines. There's valid criticism to be had, but also there's some people who are very clearly trying to criticize her just to be transphobic. So you kind of have to there's some valid criticism to be had here, but fuck those people. You know what I mean? The people who are just trying to be bigoted sacks of shit, fuck them. Yeah, it feels like a very delicate line to walk on.
That's key. How do you feel about potentially being investigated and potentially charged with a crime in Florida? Like, how does Lilly feel about this being like a thing?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but earlier when we heard about like the crime thing being investigated or whatever, it was in relation to the bathroom photographs, wasn't it? Which I don't know the law. Well, let's look up the laws in Florida. Let's just fucking do it. Because if it's a case of, if they're trying to bring a case against her for the stupid, trans women in bathrooms thing, there was that one person, what is their name? The trans person who actually got arrested for using a bathroom in Florida. That situation, that's bullshit. That's just a transphobic law. Let's just call it what it is. But when it comes to like the photographs in the bathroom thing, like if that's what it's Marcy, Raitgen. I don't know how to pronounce their last name. But Marcy. That was the person who was like one of the first people to get arrested for using a woman's restroom as a trans woman in Florida. But yeah, if this is a case of that, then I don't give a shit. Like that's just like a transphobic law to begin with, and I don't give a fuck. But if it's related to, violating people's privacy in the bathroom and, illegal photographs in the bathroom like that, then, well, it's against the law and you broke the law. What can I say? That's what I got distracted. That's what we're trying to do. See what the laws are in Florida. Is it illegal to take pictures or video in a public restroom in Florida? Hopefully I don't end up on a watch list for looking this up. Why are you looking that up, tipster? Let's see. In Florida, it is illegal to secretly record or photograph someone in a public restroom without their knowledge and consent. This is because public restrooms are considered private spaces where individuals have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Unauthorized recording or photography in such settings is considered a violation of privacy and can result in both criminal and civil penalties. So yeah, if they're charged with a crime in relation to that, then yeah, you broke the law. I mean, that it's a crime and it is a violation of people's privacy. So I can't say that I mean, I was against it when Dr. Disrespect did it, and I'm against it in this case too. But if it's like the law of it's a trans person in a women's restroom, and like that's the law that they try to charge you with. Like, fuck that shit. That's a transphobic law. I don't give a fuck about that. But it seems like this is, if my understanding is correct, according to what the interviewer suggested. The interviewer suggested that it's in relation to the photographs in the restroom, which, like, yeah, you you broke the law.
It is already
you violated people's privacy. Like, yeah, it is what it is.
A crime to be trans in Florida, more or less, and it is becoming that more and more every single day. Being trans puts a target on your head.
It's a slippery slope, right? Because when they're being investigated, on one side, because it is Florida, and like a lot of the lawmakers in Florida are in favor of like very transphobic like laws being passed and stuff like that, like the whole bathroom thing. On one end, they probably are being targeted by lawmakers because they're trans, right? In Florida. On the other hand, they did commit an actual crime in regards to, you know, violating people's privacy. So it's kind of like, it's a very slippery slope type thing. Like, yeah, she's probably being targeted, but she also did genuinely violate people's privacy and commit a crime. So, fuck, dude.
In Florida. Whether or not you are a content creator making a point in Disney.
And to be clear, when I said dude, I wasn't referring to her. Just to be clear.
It is unsafe. Trans people...
So if you were making a point in Disney, you knew the significance that the...
I would argue that the photographs thing in the bathroom and violating people's privacy is a lot more problematic than, like, the corn dog thing. Even though I do think that, like, you know, it's the kind of content that's clearly meant to farm outrage from transphobes and right-wingers and shit like that. And I think that there's valid criticism to be had in that regard. I think the photographs thing is a lot more worthy of criticism.
Location would have on the content you were...
Because that's a blatant violation of people's privacy in the restroom.
Created. You know how it was going to be perceived going into it. This wasn't a surprise.
Oh, this is the part. This is where she admits that, yeah, she did know that this was going to farm outrage. This is where she admits to it.
And it is becoming that more and more every single day. Being trans puts a target on your head in Florida. Whether or not you are a content creator making a point in Disney, it is unsafe. Trans people...
So if you were making a point in Disney, you knew the significance that the location would have on the content you were creating. You know how it was going to be perceived going into it. This wasn't a surprise to you when you...
And to be clear, when I give criticism about that video discussing like sex reassignment surgery in Disneyland, I'm not saying, I want to make this crystal fucking clear. You know, if you're a social media influencer who's trans and you want to discuss trans issues, I don't think discussing trans issues inherently in itself is inappropriate if you're at Disneyland. Like, if you happen to be at Disneyland and you want to cover like a topic that's related to like trans people and issues that trans people face, you want to educate people through your content, I don't think any discussion of any trans related issue whatsoever is inappropriate while at Disneyland. Let me make that crystal fucking clear. I do, however, think when you're discussing something like sex reassignment surgery at Disneyland, that it clearly comes off as outrage bait for, you know, right-wingers to lose their shit and like just farm outrage clicks. Does that make sense? I don't know why I just randomly got something in my eye and it's really irritating me.
The point that I am trying to make, and a point that I think I make quite well, is that we are not...
To be honest, I wasn't sure when it was only the corn dog thing. Filming in the bathroom made up my mind. Shape up, lady, do better. Tipster, it's almost 3 a.m. I'm going to head out and sleep. No problem. You have yourself a good night. I know it's kind of late as well. This is running a little bit longer than I intended for it to. But I want to finish this before I go to bed. But yeah, you have yourself a good night. Take it easy.
Going to be sitting around in our houses, sad that we can't...
Are there any other mods in chat? Just as a heads up. If not, I may mod someone else.
Can't be ourselves in public.
Just like a temporary mod. if there's nobody else here.
I am allowed to be trans at Disney. Okay?
Yeah, and nobody's making that argument. Like, you can be trans at Disneyland. You can even make content in regards to trans issues while at Disneyland. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I just think that the nature of said content, that there are certain like things that maybe shouldn't be discussed at Disneyland. But yeah,
there is
like, I don't think that the topic of sex reassignment surgery is something that should be discussed at Disneyland. You know,
this weird misconception that I'm going around Disney World handing out corn dogs to kids saying, oh my gosh, have you heard about bottom surgery? Oh my God, if you drink this drink, just drink it, you'll turn trans, right? Like, I'm making content that is engaging, that is provocative on purpose.
At the same time, controversial. Yeah. Would you not agree?
How art works.
So this is it. This is where they admit. I want to run this back a little bit, actually. This is where they openly admit that, yes, my content is intended to be provocative and controversial.
The significant...
So that's the part where I'm like, look, they're fully aware that their content likely brings negative attention to the trans community, and they do it anyway. That's the part where I'm like, it's kind of a problem though, right? Because like, you're a trans advocate, which is great. You know, I think that at this moment in time, you know, the trans community needs as many advocates as they can get. You know, when we live in a climate where, you know, the right is clearly trying to take away the rights of trans people, we need all the advocates we can get for sure. But if the content you're producing, you know, in your mind brings negative attention to that community that you intend to help, and you continue to do it anyway, I do think that that's a little bit concerning. Like, am I wrong to feel like that would be concerning? Because again, I'm trying to be as sensitive with this topic as possible. I'm not trying to pander to the right in any way, shape, or form. Quite the opposite. I care about the trans community. I want people to have rights to, you know, gender affirming care, the health care they need, the right to express themselves for who they are. Like, I want these things for the trans community. The last thing I want to do is help that community. But like, am I wrong to say that, like, if we have a trans creator who is creating content that they know feeds into the negative stereotypes that the right presents, you know, towards trans people, they know that it feeds into those stereotypes and they do it anyway, is that a problem? I think it is.
That the location would have on the content you were creating. You know how it was going to be perceived going into it. This wasn't a surprise to you when you...
The point that I am trying to make, and a point that I think I make quite well, is that we are not going to be sitting around in our houses sad that we can't be ourselves in public. I am allowed to be trans at Disney.
I agree. I think it's perfectly fine being, you know, trans and being out in public. I don't think that trans people should have to hide in their homes and not express themselves freely in a public place. I think I totally agree with that 100%.
Okay. There is this weird misconception that I'm going around Disney World handing out corn dogs to kids saying, oh my gosh, have you heard about bottom surgery? Oh my God, if you drink this drink, just drink it, you'll turn trans, right?
If there's anybody like representing like what actually happened in that content and they're misrepresenting it in this way, like, yeah, that's not okay, because that's clearly not what she's doing. I do agree with some of the criticism that people are directing towards her in terms of like time and place, in terms of certain types of content. But having said that, like, I don't agree with that narrative. That doesn't seem to be based. That doesn't at all seem to be based in reality.
Like, I'm making content that is engaging.
I agree, but that's not the crux of the matter. Yeah, exactly.
That is provocative on purpose.
At the same time, controversial. Yeah. Would you not agree?
How art works.
So controversy is going to...
See, that's That's the concern a lot of people have. And keep in mind, these aren't just transphobes looking to demonize Lilly, Tino, just, because they're trans. This isn't just, even cisgender people who may not understand, trans issues. These are members of the trans community that look at this and say, this person is creating rage bait content intentionally, knowing that it's rage bait content, and this could potentially bring negative attention to the trans community. And I think that their concerns are valid, especially when we have them right here in this interview, openly admitting, yes, I know my content is controversial. Yes, I know my content is rage bait, and I'm going to do it anyway. I think that people are, especially trans people, have a right to be concerned about that. I think that's totally fair, and I don't think everybody who's critical of them on the basis of that is transphobic.
Going to create negative energy, especially in our political climate that we're in right now. We're being attacked from all angles. You feel that this is the right time and place to be bringing that sort of controversy, which in turn negative attention to the trans community? You think it's more beneficial than it is harmful?
So what's the alternative? Let's say that
not making that content at Disneyland is the alternative. Doing it somewhere else besides Disneyland and Disney World. Like, people make content at Disneyland and Disney World, but they're eating the corn dogs. They're not talking about turning them inside out.
The equivalent would be me going to Disneyland and making a TikTok with a wiener and a corn dog demonstrating my penis enlargement surgery. Not appropriate. I mean, yeah. And I think the thing is, like, in that context, like, I think a lot of people would openly be like, oh yeah, like, that's totally inappropriate. You should not be doing that. But yeah, I think that that's actually like a good comparison. Like, yeah, there are settings in which, like, it's perfectly fine to have that conversation and even use a corn dog as a, tool to demonstrate the conversation you're trying to have. And it's fine, right? Like, let's say you're at home and you're filming a video like that, or you're in a bar and you're like a bar for adults and you're filming a video like that. Like, that's fine. Some people might think it's a little bit weird, but, like, it's fine to have that conversation in, like, a very adult focused, like, setting. But, like, when you're in a setting that is very, like, kid friendly and there's a lot of kids present, like, understandably, like, some people are going to look at that and be like, hey, like, maybe this is a little bit counterproductive to what you're trying to do here.
And using cake pops to describe bodily parts.
I think so.
I don't think there's a problem with using, in this case, like a corn dog to describe a bodily part. I think that part's perfectly fine. I just don't agree with the setting in which she did so.
Do you ever feel that there's a line you shouldn't cross, or you're willing to cross any line to get that attention, the views, that to get your word out?
Two things. Number one, I recently posted a video about sports, and we don't need to talk about it other than for me to say, when I was filming that, specifically the shots on the track and field, there were children around. They were around. Children are everywhere. That's what I'm trying.
Well, what was the conversation you were having about sports, though? If the conversation is, I would imagine in that setting, you're talking about sports in regards to, like, trans rights, and you're at, like, a track and field. I would imagine the conversation was largely focused on the issue of, like, trans rights in regards to competitive sports, which in that particular context, it doesn't matter if there's kids present, because there's nothing inappropriate about talking about sports with kids being present. There's no issue there. In this case, you're describing, the case that people have issues with, where you're describing, sex organs, essentially. You're describing sex reassignment surgery of sexual organs in a theme park where children may be present. That's a completely different issue. And there's a reason why people think that that may be an inappropriate place to have that kind of conversation. Discussing sexual anatomy, in a place where kids are present, comparing that to discussing sports in a place where kids are present, that's not the same thing. Like, that's not an even comparison at all.
They're at the park. They're everywhere except my apartment, right? I can't go walk down the street for 5 minutes without seeing someone who's a kid, right? We exist in public as trans human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Kids exist at Disney. Kids exist outside of Disney. I like Disney because I love theme parks. Okay? I love food.
Fair.
I love silly, funny content. I grew up watching a show called Good Eats, where
Are you calling the content you made at Disneyland silly, fun content?
Yeah, I'm cutting a corn dog. That's silly.
I mean, yeah. In fairness to her, it is like, it is silly. Like, it is a silly, entertaining way of presenting the topic of sex reassignment surgery. And like I said, I think it's very informative content. Like, if you're not knowledgeable of that subject and you want to learn about that subject, that is a fun, silly, entertaining way to learn it. And I think it's fine on its surface. I don't, as I've said before, and again, like, I probably feel like sound like a broken record saying this, but I'm trying to broach this topic in the most sensitive way possible, because I'm not trying to bully or target this person or harass this person. I'm not trying to be, like a shitty person, and I'm certainly not trying to pander to right-wingers by giving this criticism, or transphobes by giving this criticism. But I think in most other settings, that kind of conversation presented in that way would be fun, it would be entertaining, and it would be perfectly fine. I just don't know if a theme park where many kids, like, there's going to be lots of kids present. I don't know if a theme park where lots of kids are going to be present is the appropriate place to have a conversation like that.
But
and I actually think that Doggo Duck gave a perfect example in that, like, if you were to do that exact same content, but instead of discussing sex reassignment surgery, you were discussing penis enlargement surgery. Like, I think a lot of people would look at content about that particular subject presented in a similar way and be like, yeah, that's inappropriate. It's very inappropriate to discuss that topic at, like, Disneyland. And people could very easily understand that that's inappropriate. So I think there's a lot of similarity between that example and what Lilly Tino did in regards to sex reassignment surgery.
In which you're doing it, and the descriptions you're using it as.
See, the interviewer seems to take a lot of issue with using the corn dog as a sort of teaching aid. You know how, like, some teachers, when they're teaching certain topics, they'll use props as like a teaching aid to kind of give an example of what they're discussing. I don't have a problem at all with the use of the corn dog. I think the use of the corn dog is fine. It's the setting in which the conversation is taking place that's the issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't think that's okay.
Almost like the women that do TikToks at the gym doing things they shouldn't be doing and them getting mad and using the "it's because I'm a woman" shtick. Yeah, I'm surprised more gyms don't crack down on the whole, like, filming at the gym thing, because, like, for a lot of people, the gym, even though it's, it's a public gym, it's still somewhat of like a private space, similar to like a bathroom, where, like, they're just trying to, like, get their workout in peace. Like, as an example, like, I'm a person who, I probably should go to the gym. I'd like to go to the gym. Maybe at some point I'll get a gym membership and go to the gym, because I do want to lose weight. But if I were in the gym and I'm just trying to, like, privately get my workout at the gym, just kind of get my workout in and then move on with my day, and somebody who's very insecure about my appearance, I would be very upset if somebody was filming at the gym and they happened to catch me in the background doing my, workout at the gym. I would feel very violated by that, because of how insecure I am about my appearance. I'm really surprised more gyms don't crack down on that sort of thing.
Okay. I mean, a lot of people don't think being
huge amounts of people, like, and it makes them feel negative towards other people that are trans.
Okay.
Regardless if they agree with it or not.
Do you truly believe that.
Yeah, see, I don't agree with that framing either. This notion that like their content makes more people feel more negative when they're trans. It's like the commenter before, I forget who it was, but there was a commenter who said that like, oh, if you're very aggressive towards somebody who accidentally misgenders you, then that may like shift them to be more bigoted. I disagreed with that position because I feel like if somebody being, like a trans person getting upset because you misgendered them and they get like really aggressive with you because, even though you did it as an accident, if that interaction makes you become a bigot, then that was always in you. Like, like you're not just going to magically become a bigot just because you have a negative interaction with like a trans person. It was already in you. You may not have noticed it before or really even thought about it before, but that was already in you. For most people, if you're not a bigot, it's not going to magically make you a bigot just because you have a negative experience with a trans person. And it's the same sort of thing here. I don't agree with that framing by the interviewer.
Without my content, people would feel no negative feelings towards trans people.
I feel like there would be less.
You think that I am responsible for a lot of negative feeling towards trans people?
I think you have a significant reach. Your most viewed videos is 40 million.
I don't agree with that framing either. I don't think that Lilly Tino contributes to more negative perception of trans people. I think that the problem with some of Lilly Tino's content is that it gives the right ammunition to try and justify some of their positions and some of their misrepresentation of the trans community. I think that's the problem. I don't think that, Lilly Tino's content is magically manufacturing an army of bigots. I don't think that that's the case.
40 million.
Because again, you don't just like magically overnight become like a bigoted person. You either are a bigot or you're not.
Nearly 40 million views.
Not even close to 40 million. Like,
it's 39 million I checked today.
What? Where am I getting 40 million views? I'm not getting paid for 40 million views. Maybe 4.
Okay. Go to keep going into that. What's the most amount of money you've ever earned off a single video? Are you willing to say that?
Okay.
It's not manufacturing, but it's feeding into an already existing machine of transphobes. Yeah, as like I said, it's giving them ammunition to try and justify a lot of their stereotypes that they put on trans people or the labels that they put on trans people. Like if somebody's saying like, trans people are like groomers, they might point to like, oh, see, look at this Lilly Tino video. Like this is like groomer behavior, or something along those lines. That's the issue. They're not making people become bigoted overnight because their content is controversial or problematic. They're just feeding the narrative of already existing transphobes.
Was probably the video that Elon Musk commented on a couple of years ago. And I will say that the average I make on any given video is a couple $100.
Yeah, that makes sense because they're primarily a TikTok creator. And if you've ever spoken to someone who makes content on TikTok, the margins for payouts for like the rev share on TikTok is so minuscule. Like it got to the point where like I used to be friends with like Ricky Berwick, for example. And they were talking about the fact that, well, first of all, Ricky's Canadian. And at the time, they didn't have a partnership program available for Canadians. But they were talking about how if they were monetized at that time, even though they're getting millions and millions of views on TikTok, that would translate to very, very, very little money. Like TikTok's payouts are insanely small and minuscule.
Even with millions of views, 10 million views, you get a couple $100.
I mean,
instead of starving them of this kind of actions, she's intentionally or unintentionally feeding them. Well, she openly admitted it moments ago. Like she's intentionally making this content for it to be rage bait. For me, that's the issue. Let me make this clear. If she was completely oblivious to like a lot of the controversy that her content could be causing going into it, and like let's say she films that Disneyland video and has no idea whatsoever that, like, oh yeah, this can be perceived very negatively and it could bring negative attention to the trans community. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't really think about that when I made that content, and that wasn't my intention. It's like, okay, there's still criticism to be had for that video, but you can kind of give them a little bit of like, okay, well, they didn't mean for this to be negative or bring negative attention to the trans community. So in that case, it's like, yeah, it was not a great video to make, but she wasn't intending to bring negative attention to this community. She wasn't intending to make this a controversial video. So in that regard, it's like, okay, well, she's not doing something really, problematic. Let's put it that way. Again, I'm trying to cover this sensitively, so I'm being very careful with my words here. The issue is, moments ago, she openly admitted that she makes this content to be provocative and controversial. That's where that's where, for me, that's where the real issue is. It's one thing if you're making content with it not with the intention of it being controversial and like provocative in a way that's meant to encourage, like, provoke rage bait. Okay, it's one thing if you're doing that and it just has the unintended consequence of doing that, or you just didn't think about it and so it has the unintended consequence of doing that. She openly admits that that's the intended consequence, to farm rage bait, to make it controversial, to make it provocative. That's where, me personally, I have concerns about it.
And if you're in the creator program,
and I think that that's where the majority of people who are critical of the content have concerns about it. They've always speculated that she's intentionally doing this to, create controversy and farm rage bait clicks, and now we have her on record admitting to it.
That the RPM, the rate per mil, TikTok ain't generous with that. It depends on a lot of things.
I do know you have to have qualified views and things like that. I don't really make money on views, so. But I've seen as much as $1,000 per million views RPM.
Wait, what? Say that one more time.
$1,000 per a million views for RPM.
I feel like you've got to be a very, very large creator to get that kind of revenue threshold on TikTok, because pretty much everybody I've spoken to that is monetized on TikTok, they make hardly anything. And we're not talking people who are getting like, 100 views here and there, like maybe 1,000 views here and there, or even something like 10 or 20,000 views here and there. We're talking about people who are getting like millions of views and they're making practically nothing. It seems like the bigger payouts, like if you want to do short form content, would be like YouTube Shorts, for example. Like YouTube Shorts, even though YouTube Shorts don't pay as well as regular YouTube content, YouTube Shorts seem to do a hell of a lot better than TikTok. There's a lot of people I know who are monetized on TikTok and they aren't making shit.
RPM.
Not even close. It's like RPM.
You know that every creator's RPM is different based off a bunch of different things.
No.
So you talked about your following and having a lot of people that support you, and you're not wrong. You have over 400,000 followers, right?
Yes.
Okay, currently there is a petition with over 500,000 signatures, more than that follow you, that think you should be banned. Regardless of if you could actually be banned from a petition like this, how does it feel knowing that large amount of people think that what you're doing is not appropriate and shouldn't be allowed on TikTok?
Considering there is a lot of genuine transphobia that is aimed at Lilly Tino, I think it's probably safe to assume that a large majority of those people signing that petition are probably transphobic people. So if I'm being honest, I don't really give a shit about a petition or the results of a petition. There's plenty of petitions that get made on social media and they get like high numbers on them, but it never really amounts to anything to begin with. So like presenting a petition in the first place, it just kind of seems pointless, if I'm being completely honest. But no, I'm willing to bet that there's probably at least a decent percentage, a pretty noteworthy percentage of people who sign that petition who are probably just transphobic and just want to see her get banned because, they're transphobic and they want to deplatform a trans person. That's not to say that I don't think there's anybody who has valid criticism against Lilly Tino. I think that there are. But yeah, undoubtedly there's a large group of people who are transphobic that just want to see a trans person be deplatformed.
There are more than 500,000 people in the world that believe that trans people shouldn't exist. So I'm not too bothered.
Okay. So you do not do and make this content and this what you know is controversial. You said yourself going into Disneyland, you knew the reaction you were going to get. If you're not doing this for views and money, why take your content so far and be so controversial about it?
The point is not to be controversial. The point is...
Why? Wait. Well, that seems to conflict with what they said earlier, though. Because earlier, they said they make this content knowing it's provocative and controversial. But now they're saying the point isn't to be controversial. So, which one is it? That's really confusing. That's very contradictory.
Is to engage.
Yeah, that kind of doesn't make any sense, right, Momoon?
To educate. If you sit down and aim a camera at your face and say, bottom surgery is the process by which a surgeon takes a blah, 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 and does a blah, 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 and flips the blah, 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 no one's going to care. No one cares. But if you take an otherwise boring topic, whatever it is, and this is why I was talking about the shows that inspired me as a kid. Good Eats is one of them. Bill Nye the Science Guy, Iron Chef, Mythbusters. These shows all take scientific concepts, maybe not Iron Chef, but they take relatively uninteresting textbook concepts and they bring them into their content with props, with lights, with music, with all these different things to make it fun and exciting. And that's how they teach you, right? No one cares about a textbook that's boring.
Yeah, but it's a more fragile environment that we live in, especially in this political environment that we have, and all these things that trans people are dealing with. To purposely go into Disneyland and make and talk about such descriptive and inappropriate things at some points.
What's inappropriate about it?
It's just not an appropriate thing to do at Disney World.
Why?
Yeah, see, that's the thing is like discussing the topic of gender reassignment surgery. There's nothing inappropriate about that. There's nothing inappropriate whatsoever about discussing that topic or even discussing it in the way that Lilly Tino discusses it, using a corn dog as a prop, as a visual aid. That's the word I was looking for earlier, a visual aid. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's just the place. You know, there's a time and place for everything. And like, I don't think that Disney World, a theme park that's occupied by children, is the appropriate place for that conversation. There's nothing wrong whatsoever about the conversation itself. It's just the place.
I don't understand how you think that is okay. And going into more of this, some would argue that your content is being aimed and directed at children. Between the impersonation of children's characters and the content in the Disney parks, you've even gone as far as creating other content, as you would like to put it, while portraying children's characters. How do you justify this, and how could you think that this type of behavior is acceptable?
Like Velma?
Several children's, or not several, I know of two. That one and
Lola Bunny?
Miss Rachel.
Oh, I never...
Two different, I'm not saying you did both in the...
Okay, I think that point is kind of like nitpicking at that point. If she's discussing the concept of like various different types of issues that trans people face while like cosplaying as like a character, whether it's like a children's focused character or not, I don't think that matters. I think that's nitpicking at that point. Now, granted, I haven't seen the examples of what, Myra here, that was her name, right? Myra. I apologize if I'm getting your name wrong. I totally apologize. But the interviewer here, I I haven't seen the specific examples they're referring to, but like if you're discussing like trans-related issues while dressed up as a character, I don't think that that's problematic at all.
Other content, but you've used children's characters.
I've never brought Miss Rachel into other content, ever. Nor would I.
You have a video where you're like dressed up like Miss Rachel, am I wrong?
Oh wait, are they saying that they create, when they say other content, are they referring to adult content?
No, Velma has been a character for like 60 years and is a staple in cosplay, both other content and otherwise. And I think it's ridiculous to suggest that Velma is, cosplaying Velma is crossing a line. It's
so you don't understand why people are upset about that. You don't understand why that makes people upset.
Say that one more time.
You don't understand why.
Isn't Velma an underage character? So Velma is one of the examples. I think is Velma an underage character? I don't recall. How old is the character Velma? Yeah, Velma's an underage character, so like that's understandably like dicey territory. According to what I looked up, it says Velma is 15 years old, and based on like depending on what season, the age varies from 16 to 17, 17 to 18. So it depends on what season of the Scooby-Doo series you're referring to. But yeah, Velma is largely an underage character. So yeah, that gets into some slippery slope territory for sure. Yeah, there are understandably some people who have an issue with like adults. Like it's one thing to cosplay as a child character and it's just like you're just dressed up in a costume as that character. Okay, fine, there's like nothing wrong with that. But when you're presenting like, because they're saying they're mentioning that character in regards to other content, and I'm assuming other content means like OnlyFans type content or like adult content, that sort of thing. So when you're presenting like an underage character in a sexual nature, like, yeah, that's problematic. You're getting into some dicey territory there.
Those situations would make people upset.
Like if she was just on TikTok dressed as like Velma and discussing like, a trans issue while dressed up as Velma, I don't necessarily see that as a problem. But yeah, if you're creating like sex work while dressed up as Velma, I can understand why some people would take issue with that. It's very much like the lolly conversation, right? Where like there's people who understandably take issue with lolly content because it's like a portrayal of a child or like an underage person in like a sexual nature. And because of that, they see that as inappropriate. It's a similar thing, right? You're portraying a minor character, an underage character in a sexual nature. And so, yeah, like I can understand the criticism of that.
Oh, I understand. I'm not stupid. I mean, I'm not, I get it, but also like the alternative, like, yes, I could say, you know what? My content is too provocative. Let me just dial it down a little bit. My content immediately becomes boring. And the message you send out.
You think you only have something if you're controversial? I don't think that's true. I think we have the power to do a lot without like drawing the line.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of, content creators in like progressive or, queer spaces that, portray, basically do forms of advocacy through their content without being controversial. I don't think you have to be controversial in order to do advocacy, because that's what they say that they're doing through their content. That's what they're trying to achieve through their content. They're trying to do trans advocacy through their content. I don't think you have to be controversial to do so. In fact, I think in some circumstances it's counterproductive to be controversial, depending on the circumstances.
And like taking things as far as we can possibly take them.
That's just who I am. And there is no reality in which we as a trans people can advocate for ourselves and make progress without upsetting people. People do not want us to exist. It doesn't matter what.
Yeah, you're right. There's people that just don't want us to exist, but drawing such negative attention, it creates negative energy, and it just builds and builds and spreads like a wildfire.
Why is it negative?
Because it's so controversial.
Why is it controversial? I know I'm like...
Let's go to Disneyland and make it controversial, and you did that as a conscious thought. You just said you knew that going there, the reaction you were going to get. You consciously went there knowing that it was going to cause controversy and create negativity and build on the wild.
See, that's what I was like elaborating on earlier when I talked about the fact that like they start the video by saying Disney's probably going to ban me for this. Like that seemed to suggest to me that they knew going into it that some people would see an issue with that sort of thing. Upset fascists all day, but be smarter. Oh yeah, absolutely. I have no problem with people pissing off like fascists or, you know, transphobes or, you know, people like the far right or whatever. Like, no problem with that whatsoever. Like, you know, they claim that we're the triggered ones, but like they seem to be the ones that are most triggered simply by queer people existing. So fuck them, right? But yeah, exactly. I agree with that statement by Doggo Duck. Upset fascists all days, but be smart about it. 100%. Okay, now she's being obfuscate. I think you mean like she's obfuscating.
Fire of hate that is already directed at the trans community. You did all this willingly and knowingly. You're smart, Lily. I know you're smart. I know you're smart, Lily.
I know I'm smart too. Let's talk about that last thing you said, right? Adding to the wildfire of hate against the trans community. Okay? Without me, take me out of the equation, the wildfire is raging. Look at the legislation. You know, it's out there. It's bad days, tough days. The alternative to making content.
I will say this too. I want to clarify this. Like, I don't think that, you know, I don't think that Lilly Tino is the worst example of people, you know, causing, you know, harm to the trans community as a trans person themselves. When I look at somebody who's most likely doing more harm to trans people as a trans person themselves, I look at somebody like Blair White, for example. Like Blair White, like will intentionally present content in a way that's negative towards the perception of trans people. So I think somebody like, you know, just as an example off the top of my head, I think Blair White does a hell of a lot more harm to the trans community than someone like Lilly Tino does. Having said that, I don't think that people's concerns about Lilly Tino are invalid.
That is not provocative, right? Pushing people's understanding, pushing people's poking and prodding at people's internalized transphobia, right? I know that when people I knew when I was taking those pictures in the bathroom, that when people saw them, even people who say they are allies, internalized transphobia will be triggered, right? Seeing a clocky trans woman.
See, I think that's like bad faith, right? Like, obviously, I'm someone who's very pro-trans. I've been, you know, an outspoken advocate for trans rights. I support trans people, and like, I just want them to be able to have access to the healthcare needs that they need, and be able to live healthy, happy lives just like everybody else. Okay. But when I look at like the bathroom situation, we took a look at it earlier on stream. When I look at that, I think positioning that as like internalized transphobia, my criticism of Lilly Tino in regards to like the bathroom stuff, like invading people's privacy in the bathroom, that has nothing to do with the fact that Lilly Tino's trans, okay? I would say the same thing if it was, you know, a cisgendered woman. I would say the same thing if it was a man, you know, because I gave that same criticism to Dr. Disrespect back when Dr. Disrespect did it. Okay, this was a cisgender man going into a men's restroom and violating people's privacy by live streaming in the bathroom. Okay, I gave the same criticism to a cisgender man at the time. Okay, so this isn't about, you know, Lilly Tino being trans. This isn't like internalized transphobia on my part or anything like that. Okay, this is literally just when you're taking photos in the bathroom like that, or when you're taking video in the bathroom like that, you are violating people's privacy, and it's immoral. And in the jurisdiction you were in, it's also illegal to do so. So this criticism has nothing to do with transphobia. It's just you're violating people's privacy, and it's wrong.
In a bathroom, it's going to trigger some people. That's the point. Is to challenge people's...
Literally trying to trigger people, though. That's a negative energy. You're triggering them in a negative way.
I mean, if thought-provoking art is crossing a line, then we just have a disagreement on what art is. If you are upset that a piece of art...
Art is not going to Disneyland and cutting up a corn dog. That is not art. That's diabolical.
What are you talking about?
I mean, art is subjective, so I disagree with that.
Why not?
Have you ever communicated with a minor in an inappropriate way?
What? Oh, okay, what the fuck? All right, that was out of line. I just got to be real. You know, as much criticism as I have for Lilly, Tino, and some of like the content they produce and things like that, that was out of line to take it there. What the fuck?
No.
I do not agree with that question whatsoever. That was so out of line.
There's an allegation of a stream and a mom coming in and...
Wait, what?
Changing the subject.
The vegetable thing? I made a video
Wait, what's the vegetable thing? I'm so confused.
about that. That person was 25 years old. There are people in the stream right now, in my stream. I guess you can't see them. They were there.
So that was just a misunderstanding. I know.
That was like, okay, even with the context of like, hey, there was this situation that people claimed it was like a minor involved or whatever. That was just a super out of pocket fucking question. Holy shit. And like, it's made even worse now, like with the framing of like, hey, we're talking about like this situation where you made a video that we think is a video that's inappropriate to make at Disneyland, you know, because kids are present. You go from that to, boom, have you ever had an inappropriate conversation with a minor? Like, whoa, talk about getting flashbanged. Holy shit.
There's misunderstandings, and I know people skew things. We saw that prior to this when somebody made a video that looked like you were saying something about me. But when I step back and I look at everything from a holistic view and take opinions from all across the board, I see so much more negative responses to the content you create than I see positivity or people being uplifted. I just, as I stand back and look at this, from not looking at either view, whether I like you or I don't like you, the overall consensus that I see is the majority of people are not happy with any of this. They think it's completely unacceptable.
The biggest concern I see from a lot of people, whether it's, you know, trans people that I've spoken to in private about, you know, these particular concerns, or, you know, cisgendered people, it always comes down to the fact that, you know, the right is looking for any reason to strip the rights away from trans people. And the right is looking for any reason to slap these labels on trans people, you know, that are just, it's transphobic rhetoric. Okay. And they don't want, you know, to give the right any excuse or any ammunition to try and put these labels on on trans people, or to try and put these labels, or to try and justify the stripping of trans people's rights. That seems to be the biggest concern. And they think that some of the content that Lilly Tino produces gives them that ammunition. That's the biggest concern I've seen. And I think in some cases that those concerns are valid.
Okay. I mean, once again,
I'm sure there are plenty of like transphobic people who are making those arguments against them as well, just to kind of feed their own transphobia and whatnot. And obviously I don't align myself with those people. But I do think that members of the trans community who are watching, you know, government and legislation every day strip them of their rights, I think they are very... I think they are valid to be concerned about how this content feeds into a lot of that rhetoric against them, which ultimately that rhetoric contributes to more of their rights being stripped away.
Get back to the idea that our algorithms tell us what we want to hear. There are plenty of people.
That's not true, though, because I've done all sorts of research. I've done all sorts of research. I'm not just stuck on the everybody against Lilly algorithm. I've looked in all corners. I've talked to all different sorts of people. I've seen all different sorts of things.
Then the
overall consensus is
not
more negative than it is positive.
Versus my TikTok comments. I refuse to be someone I'm not. I am a clocky, confrontational, provocative person. That's who I am. I am not the kind of person who is going to make content that is goody two-shoes trans girl. Oh my God, I have every box ticked for you. I'm exactly what you want to see so that we can, please, please, please give us our rights. Please, we'll be exactly who you want us to be.
So
no.
How far are you willing to go with this? Is there no line you wouldn't cross?
Of course
if you're willing to go to Disneyland and make the content you make and take bathroom selfies with people that aren't willing participants in the background, posting that for millions.
Yeah, for me, that's the bigger issue, is the bathroom thing. Because again, we literally dealt with a similar situation with like Dr. Disrespect, several years ago, before he had been banned on Twitch and before we found out that he was having inappropriate conversation with minors. So obviously there's bigger issues with Dr. Disrespect now. But before we knew about all that, we saw the situation with Dr. Disrespect in the E3 bathroom. And like everybody agreed in that situation that like, yeah, taking pictures of people or like filming people in a public bathroom without their consent, not okay. And I think in this situation that totally applies as well. Not okay. Yeah, I do have my criticisms of the whole, discussing sex reassignment surgery at Disneyland. I think that there are some genuine concerns to be had there. But for me, the biggest criticism that I've learned about in this situation is the bathroom thing. Like, you're literally like, it's totally immoral to invade people's privacy while they're in the bathroom. Whether, the bathroom is a place where you're expected to have some level of privacy. And by taking pictures of them without their knowledge or consent, you're absolutely invading their privacy. That's not okay.
The people to see.
For me, that's the biggest issue to come out of this conversation that I wasn't aware of going into it, is like, yeah, that's not okay. There's no way in my mind that you can justify that behavior.
Is there no line you wouldn't cross?
And to me, like, the fact that she can't admit that there's something wrong with that, it's just like, how do you not understand that that's not okay?
Like, when does it stop? Like, what length do you stop?
Like, mentally put yourself in that position of being one of these people who was photographed or filmed without your knowledge or consent, and then finding out that that was the case. Like, try to put yourself in that position and be like, that makes me really uncomfortable. I was in this space where I had an expectation of privacy and my privacy was violated. Like, obviously you wouldn't feel too good about that. So like, I can understand why somebody might look at the whole sex reassignment surgery video situation and somebody might be able to make an argument where, well, it's really not that bad. Like, while I have my own personal feelings about it, I can understand why some people would look at that and be like, well, that's not really that big of a deal. I don't see how anybody can make any justification for like photographing people in the bathroom without their knowledge or consent. That's totally unacceptable.
Going to get your word out or get your message out.
I probably need to be misgendered in space. That's probably the farthest I would go.
What?
Okay, last thing. Would you like the opportunity to publicly apologize or take accountability for any of your actions or to anyone you've negatively impacted?
I'm gonna pass on this.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you for sitting down with me.
Thank you very much.
I tried to keep my thoughts and opinions on matters out of it as much as I could, but I got a little
my friend
too far in there. I have no disrespect for you as a human. I respect all humans. I don't agree with a lot of the things you have done. I appreciate that you're willing to sit here and let me ask these questions. And yeah, I don't know if you have any last things you want to say.
That's it. I think we've covered it.
All right.
Take care. Take it easy.
Okay, so there's that. So, quite the interesting conversation. I knew about some of the controversy surrounding Lilly Tino, but I learned about some things in this conversation that I definitely wasn't aware of already. So some interesting stuff came out of this. Obviously, I gave my thoughts on this, but this is one of those conversations where I genuinely welcome open conversation of this topic, whether you agree with some of my positions I gave, whether you disagree. I really want to hear what you guys think about all of this, so feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. Feel free to be critical of me if you think that I had a wrong position here. Like I said, I did my best to cover this topic in a very sensitive manner. And while I stated this numerous times throughout the content, my intention with these criticisms is not to direct harassment towards Lilly Tino. In fact, if I find out anybody who's a member of my community is directing harassment towards Lilly Tino as a result of any criticism I gave them here, you will be banned from my community if I find out about it. So do not do that, okay? We don't encourage that sort of thing here. And I certainly do not want to pander to anybody who's like transphobic or like a member of like the far right or like a fascist or anything like that, who is just looking for somebody to validate their feelings. That is not what I'm about, okay? It's the complete opposite in terms of where I stand on this. But this is a sensitive issue, and this is an issue where like there's a lot of nuanced opinions and stuff like that. So I did my best to handle this conversation as sensitively as possible. But I really do welcome the opinions of others, as long as you're respectful. Don't come into my comment section and just be a fucking transphobe or anything like that. I don't co-sign any statements like that. But if you agree with my opinions, share your thoughts. If you disagree with my opinions, share your thoughts. I genuinely want to hear what you guys have to say on this. But that's kind of where I'm at with this. I think that it's valid for some people to be somewhat concerned about some of the content that Lilly Tino makes. And I think it is very telling that, people had been speculating for quite some time that they were intentionally making controversial content to farm outrage. And it was really interesting to hear them say that, that they're intentionally doing that with their content, basically openly admitting it. So that was definitely something.